DADA Art and Anti-Art, the radical movement that challenged conventions. Written by Haya Vent, narrated by Kara Miller. Chapter 1. The Birth of Dada. The origins of Dada can be traced back to the turbulent period surrounding World War I, a time marked by social, political, and cultural upheaval. The war, which began in 1914, devastated much of Europe and shook the very foundations of society. In the wake of such destruction, many artists and intellectuals began to question the values and conventions that had led to such violence. It was in this climate of disillusionment that Dada was born. Zurich, Switzerland, became the birthplace of this revolutionary movement. In 1916, a group of artists, poets, and performers gathered at the Cabaret Voltaire, a nightclub that would become the epicenter of Dada activity. The founders of the movement, including Hugo Ball, Tristan Tzara, Jean Arp, and others, were united by their rejection of traditional art forms and their desire to create something radically new. They sought to dismantle the established norms of art, culture, and society, and instead embrace the absurd, the irrational, and the nonsensical. Dada was not just an artistic movement, but a philosophical one as well. The word Dada itself was chosen for its lack of meaning, embodying the movement's rejection of logic and reason. It was meant to signify a complete break from the past, a radical departure from the conventional notions of art and beauty. The Dadaists believed that the established systems of government, religion, and art had failed, and they saw their work as a form of protest against these institutions. The Cabaret Voltaire was a place where these ideas could be explored through performances, poetry readings, and visual art. The Dadaists created artworks that were intentionally chaotic and nonsensical, using techniques such as collage, photomontage, and found objects. They believed that traditional art forms had become too rigid and predictable, and that by embracing randomness and chance, they could break free from these constraints. In addition to their artistic experimentation, the Dadaists sought to challenge societal norms through their actions and behavior. They often performed in deliberately provocative ways, shocking their audiences with bizarre performances and controversial statements. Dada was not just about creating art. It was about making a statement, about the absurdity of the world and the futility of trying to impose order on it. The birth of Dada in Zurich was the beginning of a movement that would spread throughout Europe and beyond, influencing artists, writers, and thinkers for years to come. It was a direct response to the horrors of war and the disillusionment of the time, and its legacy continues to shape the way we think about art and culture today. The context of pre-World War I Europe. Before the outbreak of World War I, Europe was a continent of profound contrasts, with rapidly changing social, political, and technological landscapes. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw Europe as the dominant global force, with imperial powers like Britain, France, Germany, and Austria-Hungary exerting control over vast territories. Industrialization had transformed economies, ushering in a new age of technological innovation, but also deepening class divides and creating urbanization at a rapid pace. The old aristocratic structures were beginning to shift, and the rise of capitalism, along with the spread of socialist ideas, set the stage for political unrest. Culturally, Europe was in the midst of a modernist upheaval, as artists, writers, and intellectuals began to challenge the traditions and norms of the past. The late 19th century saw the rise of movements such as Impressionism, Symbolism, and Expressionism, which rejected the rigid formalism of academic art in favor of more subjective, individual expressions of reality. Artists like Claude Monet, Edvard Munch, and Henri Matisse were reshaping the way art was perceived and created, embracing new techniques, styles, and ways of seeing the world. These movements set the groundwork for the radical ideas that would later emerge with Dada. Philosophically, the intellectual climate of pre-WWI Europe was dominated by a sense of crisis and transformation. Thinkers like Friedrich Nietzsche, Sigmund Freud, and Karl Marx were challenging established ideas about morality, psychology, and society. Nietzsche's critique of traditional morality and his proclamation that God is dead pointed to a deep existential questioning of established values. Freud's theories about the unconscious mind and human desire undermined the rationalist and idealist views of human nature, while Marx's analysis of capitalism and class struggle laid the foundation for political revolutions. Despite the cultural and intellectual ferment, Europe was also a continent gripped by political tension. Nationalism was on the rise, particularly in Eastern and Southern Europe, and imperial powers were competing for dominance, with rivalries between Germany, Britain, and France fueling an arms race. Alliances between European powers created a web of interlocking obligations, making the continent vulnerable to conflict. This atmosphere of political and social unrest, combined with the profound sense of disillusionment in the wake of industrialization and imperialism, created fertile ground for the emergence of radical movements like DADA. The war, when it came in 1914, would serve as a devastating punctuation mark to this moment of transformation, shattering the pre-war European order and leaving artists and thinkers searching for new ways to understand and express the world around them. The impact of World War I on art. World War I, which erupted in 1914, had a profound and lasting effect on all aspects of society, and the world of art was no exception. The war, with its unprecedented scale of destruction and loss of life, shattered the illusion of European progress and stability. Artists, who had already been experimenting with new forms and ideas in the years leading up to the war, found themselves grappling with a new and more complex reality. The horrors of trench warfare, the brutality of modern weaponry, and the widespread devastation forced many artists to reevaluate their roles in society and the purpose of their work. Before the war, the art world was largely dominated by movements such as Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, and Cubism, which sought to break away from traditional academic art forms. These movements focused on portraying subjective experiences, abstract forms, and the modern world. However, the reality of war introduced a new sense of disillusionment, and many artists began to reject these earlier ideals. Instead of celebrating progress and innovation, they turned their attention to the violence and chaos that had engulfed Europe. One of the most immediate impacts of the war on art was the sense of futility and despair that permeated much of the work produced during and after the conflict. The violence and trauma of war made many artists question the very foundations of art and culture. The war destroyed not only lives, but also traditional notions of beauty, morality, and social order. As a result, many artists turned to more radical forms of expression, seeking to challenge and deconstruct the conventions of art that seemed to have failed in the face of such destruction. This period saw the rise of movements like Dada, which rejected reason, logic, and established aesthetic norms in favor of chaos, absurdity, and anti-art sentiment. Dadaists, disillusioned by the war, sought to disrupt conventional art and cultural norms as a way of expressing their rejection of the values that had led to the conflict. In this context, art became a form of protest, not just against the war itself, but against the societal structures that allowed such violence to occur. The war also gave rise to a new emphasis on the trauma and alienation experienced by soldiers and civilians alike. Artists began to explore the psychological and emotional scars of war through works that depicted the horrors of the battlefield, the disfigurement of soldiers, and the suffering of those left behind. This shift marked a dramatic break from the idealized depictions of war seen in earlier centuries, and it highlighted the need for art to confront uncomfortable truths rather than simply serve as decoration or propaganda. Ultimately, World War I transformed art by pushing it into new, more confrontational territory. The war's aftermath led to a period of deep introspection and experimentation, where artists sought new ways to express the brokenness of the world around them. The impact of the war on art can still be felt today, as its legacy shaped the course of modern art movements and inspired generations of artists to come. Zurich, the founding of the Cabaret Voltaire. In the midst of World War I, as Europe was plunged into chaos and destruction, Zurich, Switzerland became an unexpected haven for artists, writers, and intellectuals seeking refuge from the violence. Switzerland's neutrality in the war made it a unique sanctuary for those fleeing the war's devastation, and Zurich quickly became the cultural and intellectual epicenter for a new wave of radical thought and artistic expression. It was here, in 1916, that the Cabaret Voltaire was founded, marking the birth of the Dada movement. The Cabaret Voltaire, established by Hugo Ball and his companions, became the physical and conceptual birthplace of Dada. Located in the heart of Zurich, the Cabaret was more than just a nightclub. It was a space for experimental art, poetry, and performance that defied convention and embraced chaos. The establishment was a direct reaction to the horrors of war and the disillusionment that many artists felt about the state of the world. The name Cabaret Voltaire itself was chosen to evoke a sense of irony, drawing from the French Enlightenment thinker Voltaire, while simultaneously rejecting the rationalism that had failed society. The founders believed that traditional forms of art and culture, as well as the rational mindset of the Enlightenment, had played a role in the devastation of the war. The cabaret quickly became a hub for the avant-garde, attracting artists, poets, and performers from around the world. It was here that the key figures of Dada, Hugo Ball, Tristan Tzara, Jean Arp, and others, began to develop the radical ideas that would define the movement. The performances at the Cabaret Voltaire were deliberately absurd and nonsensical, featuring poetry readings, sound poetry, dance, and visual art that aimed to disrupt the conventional understanding of art and language. These performances rejected logic, order, and tradition in favor of spontaneity, irrationality, and chaos, mirroring the disillusionment felt by many in the wake of the war. At the Cabaret Voltaire, Dadaists embraced an anti-art stance that would challenge the very foundations of artistic practice. They experimented with new forms of expression, often incorporating chance, randomness, and absurdity into their works. Through these groundbreaking performances, the Dadaists sought to make a statement not just about the war, but about the failure of societal structures, including art, to prevent such destruction. The spirit of rebellion and subversion that defined the Cabaret Voltaire would spread quickly across Europe and beyond, with the movement's radical ideas influencing not just visual art, but literature, theater, and philosophy as well. The founding of the Cabaret Voltaire marked the beginning of a movement that would forever change the trajectory of modern art. It was a direct response to the brutality of the war, a rejection of the past, and an exploration of new, liberated ways of thinking and creating. The legacy of the Cabaret Voltaire and the Dada movement continues to resonate in contemporary art, as their embrace of chaos and the absurd continues to inspire artists who challenge the status quo. Hugo Ball and the Origins of Dada. Hugo Ball, a German author, poet, and philosopher, stands as one of the pivotal figures in the founding of Dada. Born in 1886 in Pirmasens, Germany, Ball's early years were marked by a strong intellectual curiosity, and he initially pursued a career in literature and philosophy. However, the outbreak of World War I in 1914 would profoundly alter his life, and it was this global catastrophe that would lead him to challenge the very foundations of culture, art, and society. In 1916, along with his partner Emmy Hennings and fellow intellectuals, Ball founded the Cabaret Voltaire in Zurich, the birthplace of Dada. The origins of Dada can be traced directly to the frustration and disillusionment Ball, along with other artists of the time, felt in response to the war. The catastrophic destruction of the war, combined with the ideological failures that led to such violence, caused many intellectuals to reject the conventions and traditions of European culture. Ball, along with Tristan Tzara and others, began to believe that rational thought and conventional art had failed, contributing to the chaos and devastation. In reaction to this, they sought to create an art movement that would reject logic, reason, and all traditional notions of beauty. This rejection of the status quo was the core of what would later be called Dada. At the Cabaret Voltaire, Hugo Ball's contributions were central. He became the movement's primary spokesman and symbol, performing his own works and leading the group's performances. One of his most famous contributions to Dada was the creation of sound poetry, a form that rejected linguistic meaning in favor of pure sound. In his performance of Karawan, Ball used nonsensical syllables uttered in a rhythm that disrupted the conventions of language and speech. This groundbreaking work exemplified the Dadaists' belief in the power of randomness, spontaneity, and absurdity, which stood in stark contrast to the structured, logical approach of traditional art forms. Ball's approach to Dada was not merely artistic, it was also philosophical and political. He sought to destroy what he saw as the bourgeois sensibilities that dominated European culture. Dada was, for Ball, an act of rebellion against the order, morality, and logic that had supported the institutions leading to war. Through Dada, Ball hoped to provoke an awakening, forcing society to confront the irrationality of the world around them. Despite his central role in the movement, Ball eventually distanced himself from Dada as it became more politically radical, moving towards surrealism and other forms of artistic expression. Nevertheless, his influence on Dada's origins remains undeniable. Through his leadership and innovation, Ball helped shape a movement that challenged the very idea of art, revolutionizing how people understood creativity in the wake of war and its aftermath. The philosophy of nonsense and absurdity. At the heart of Dada lies a philosophy rooted in nonsense and absurdity, a radical departure from the logic and structure that had governed art, culture, and society for centuries. Dada emerged in response to the widespread disillusionment caused by the devastation of World War I, with its absurdity serving as a critique of the rational, ordered systems that many believed had led to such destruction. For Dadaists, the war revealed the futility and madness of human endeavors, and they sought to express this chaos and disorder through their art. The philosophy of nonsense in Dada was not simply about creating meaningless or random works for their own sake. It was a deliberate act of subversion against a world that had, in their view, become overly rationalized, mechanized, and dehumanized. In the context of post-war Europe, where social, political, and intellectual systems seem to have failed, the Dadaists embraced irrationality and spontaneity as a way to reject the conventions that had allowed such chaos to unfold. By embracing absurdity, they made a powerful statement that the traditional structures of culture and thought were no longer valid in the face of war and suffering. Nonsense, in the Dadaist sense, was a tool to dismantle the norms that governed art and society. Artists such as Hugo Ball, Marcel Duchamp, and Tristan Tzara used irrationality as a form of protest. Through absurd performances, nonsensical poetry, and experimental art forms, they questioned the very definition of art. For Dadaists, meaning was subjective, and the established rules of art were irrelevant. By removing meaning from their work, they hoped to challenge the viewer to engage with art on a different level, one that was less about understanding and more about feeling or experiencing. The use of absurdity also reflected a rejection of the traditional idea of the artist as a genius or master creator. Dadaists were less concerned with the aesthetic qualities of their works than with the ideas they communicated. Art was no longer about representation or beauty. It was about breaking down the boundaries between art and life and between the rational and irrational. The works of Dada were often intentionally chaotic and unsettling, creating a sense of discomfort that encouraged viewers to question their preconceived notions about what art could or should be. Ultimately, the philosophy of nonsense and absurdity in Dada was a radical call for freedom from the constraints of reason and tradition. It was an invitation to embrace the irrational, the chaotic, and the unpredictable aspects of life, and to confront the absurdity of the world in a way that defied convention and order. Through this rebellion against logic, Dada challenged not only the art world, but the very fabric of society itself. Chapter 2: The Key Figures of Dada. Dada was not a singular vision or a unified movement. Rather, it was a collection of diverse individuals, each bringing their own unique ideas and methods to the table. Despite their differences, these figures were united in their disdain for traditional art and their desire to break free from societal norms. The movement's key figures were poets, artists, performers, and thinkers who used their creativity to challenge the world around them, making Dada a multifaceted revolt against war, reason, and established artistic conventions. Tristan Tzara, one of Dada's founding figures, was a central intellectual force behind the movement. A Romanian poet and playwright, Tzara was instrumental in shaping Dada's philosophy of absurdity and spontaneity. His manifestos, often written in playful and nonsensical language, were foundational to Dada's anti-art stance. Tzara's passion for the irrational and the nonsensical helped spread Dada's reach to other parts of Europe, making him one of the most prominent spokespeople for the movement. Marcel Duchamp, a French artist known for his radical rethinking of art, is another of Dada's most significant figures. Duchamp's concept of the ready-made, everyday objects presented as art, challenged the very notion of what art could be. His most famous ready-made, Fountain, a porcelain urinal signed R. Mutt, epitomized the Dada spirit of questioning artistic conventions and the value of art itself. Duchamp's work was not just about visual art, but about rethinking the role of the artist and the viewer in the creative process. Jean Arp, a German-French artist, was another important contributor to Dada, particularly in the realms of collage and abstract art. Arp's work often sought to merge the boundaries between chance and control, creating pieces that were both spontaneous and structured. His use of abstract forms and organic shapes helped push Dada beyond its beginnings as a literary movement, allowing it to evolve into a broader visual art form. Francis Picabia, a French painter and writer, was known for his provocative and irreverent attitude toward art and society. His work, often satirical and deeply critical of authority, represented the rebellious spirit of Dada. Picabia's approach to Dada was marked by a blend of abstraction and figurative imagery, challenging conventional aesthetics and offering scathing critiques of the establishment. Man Ray, an American photographer and artist, became one of the most influential figures within Dada's Parisian scene. Known for his avant-garde photography and experimental techniques, including his famous rayographs, photograms, Man Ray's work embodied Dada's emphasis on experimentation and the breaking of artistic boundaries. His surrealist photography, often featuring strange, dreamlike compositions, encapsulated the essence of Dada's subversion of reality. Together, these figures shaped Dada into a radical and enduring movement that not only transformed art, but also fundamentally altered the way people thought about creativity, society, and the role of the artist in the modern world. Their collective vision and commitment to challenging the status quo ensured that Dada's impact would be felt for generations to come. Tristan Tzara, the poet and philosopher. Tristan Tzara, one of the central figures of the Dada movement, was not just an artist, but a poet and philosopher who helped define the intellectual and ideological foundation of Dada. Born in 1896 in Romania, Tzara's early life was marked by a deep interest in literature and the arts. He moved to Zurich during World War I, where he became deeply involved in the creation of the Dada movement at the Cabaret Voltaire. It was here that he, along with other radical thinkers, sought to challenge the conventional systems of art, society, and politics. Tzara's approach to Dada was both poetic and philosophical. He is perhaps best known for his role in writing Dada's manifestos, which outlined the movement's rejection of reason, logic, and the traditional values that led to war. These manifestos were a mix of philosophical musings, satire, and absurdity, perfectly encapsulating the Dadaist rejection of established systems. In these writings, Zara often employed nonsensical and fragmented language as a way of undermining the authority of language itself. To him, language had become a tool of oppression and control, and by distorting it, he hoped to expose its limitations and challenge its power. One of Zara's most famous concepts was the idea of anti-poetry. He believed that poetry, like all art, should not adhere to the constraints of form or meaning. For Zara, poetry was not about expression or beauty. It was about creating an experience that was raw, unfiltered, and often chaotic. His method for composing poetry involved a process of chance, using random words and cut-up techniques to create unexpected juxtapositions and disruptions. This approach was a direct rebellion against the formalism of traditional poetry and an embrace of spontaneity and unpredictability. Zara's philosophical outlook was heavily influenced by the disillusionment and trauma of World War I. The war had exposed the fragility of human civilization and the absurdity of modern life. Zara's writings and performances reflect this sense of crisis, as he sought to create a new kind of art that rejected the rationality and order that had led to such destruction. In Dada, Zara found a way to express his rejection of the world's traditional systems of power and knowledge. As a philosopher, Zara was also influenced by the ideas of Nietzsche, particularly his notions of the will to power and the rejection of conventional morality. Zara's vision of Dada was one of liberation, an embrace of chaos and absurdity as a means of freeing both the individual and society from the constraints of established norms. His work, both as a poet and a thinker, left an indelible mark on the trajectory of modern art and thought, influencing not just Dada, but also later movements like Surrealism and Postmodernism. Marcel Duchamp and the Ready-Made. Marcel Duchamp, a French artist who is widely regarded as one of the most influential figures in modern art, played a pivotal role in shaping the Dada movement through his revolutionary concept of the ready-made. Duchamp's ready-mades were ordinary, mass-produced objects that he selected and presented as art simply by placing them in an art context. His approach fundamentally challenged traditional ideas about what art could be and redefined the role of the artist in the creative process. The ready-made was a radical departure from conventional artistic practices that focused on craftsmanship, originality, and aesthetic beauty. Duchamp's most famous ready-made, Fountain, 1917, is a porcelain urinal signed R. Mutt, which he submitted to an art exhibition in New York. The piece was rejected by the exhibition organizers, but it went on to become one of the most iconic works in the history of modern art. By presenting a mass-produced object as art, Duchamp turned the focus away from the physical characteristics of the object itself and onto the idea behind it. For Duchamp, the essence of art lay not in the object, but in the artist's decision to present it as art. Duchamp's ready-mades were a direct challenge to the established art world, which he saw as pretentious and bound by conventions that stifled creativity. His work raised questions about authorship, value, and meaning in art, arguing that these concepts were subjective and open to interpretation. By presenting ordinary objects as art, Duchamp emphasized that context, intention, and the artist's role were more important than traditional notions of skill and aesthetic beauty. Beyond challenging traditional definitions of art, the ready-made also had a philosophical dimension. Duchamp's selection of objects was often arbitrary, emphasizing chance and randomness over meticulous planning. This embrace of the arbitrary and the anti-aesthetic perfectly with the Dada movement's rejection of logic, reason, and convention. Duchamp's ready-mades also pointed to the absurdity of assigning value to objects based on cultural and societal norms, highlighting the arbitrary nature of artistic and cultural judgments. Marcel Duchamp's contribution to Dada through the ready-made marked a turning point in the history of art, laying the groundwork for later movements such as conceptual art, pop art, and minimalism. His radical ideas about art, authorship, and meaning forever altered how artists and audiences understood creativity, and his influence can still be seen in contemporary art today. Through the ready-made, Duchamp proved that art was not about the object itself, but about the ideas it provoked and the conversations it started. Jean Arp and the Collage Revolution. Jean Arp, a pioneering German-French artist, was a key figure in the Dada movement, known for his innovative work in collage, sculpture, and abstraction. His contributions to the Dadaist revolution were significant, especially in how he redefined the role of chance and spontaneity in the creative process. Arp's exploration of collage, in particular, helped shift the focus of Dada beyond traditional artistic techniques and opened the door for new ways of understanding art in the context of chaos and randomness. Arp's approach to collage was groundbreaking because he embraced an element of chance in his creations. He would often start by cutting out shapes from paper or other materials and letting the pieces fall randomly onto a surface. The resulting compositions were then rearranged or left as they were, with little or no intervention in the final arrangement. This process emphasized the randomness of creation and the importance of removing the artist's ego and control from the work. For Arp, this process was a direct challenge to the rigidity and structure of conventional art, which often focused on the artist's intention and the perfection of the final piece. This embrace of chance was in line with the Dada movement's overall philosophy, which rejected reason, logic, and traditional aesthetics. Arp's collages were a radical departure from the meticulous, controlled methods of the academic art world. His work was not just about assembling disparate elements into a new form, but about disrupting the traditional artistic process and allowing for the unexpected to emerge. In this way, Arp's collages embodied the Dadaist spirit of freedom and anti-art, where the value of the work came not from its execution, but from the ideas it provoked and the questions it raised about the nature of art itself. Beyond his collage work, Arp was also a key figure in Dada sculpture. His abstract sculptures, often organic in form, broke with the tradition of figurative sculpture and explored the fluidity of shapes and forms in space. His emphasis on abstraction and the organic nature of his sculptures reflected Dada's desire to move away from representational art and embrace the unknown and the unpredictable. John Arp's contributions to Dada, particularly his work in collage, were instrumental in changing the trajectory of modern art. His embrace of chance and spontaneity paved the way for future movements like surrealism and abstract expressionism. By breaking down the boundaries between control and randomness, Arp's art forced viewers to reconsider their assumptions about what art could be and what it should represent. His work remains an important part of the Dada legacy, a testament to the power of spontaneity, chance, and the revolutionary spirit of the movement. Francis Picabia and his anti-art approach. Francis Picabia, a French painter, writer, and one of the most controversial figures of the Dada movement, was known for his radical approach to art, which consistently challenged established norms and rejected conventional artistic values. Picabia's work spanned a range of styles, from Impressionism and Cubism to abstract art, but it was his commitment to Dada's anti-art ethos that marked him as a central figure in the movement's critique of cultural and artistic traditions. Picabia's approach to Dada was characterized by his provocative attitude toward art, politics, and society. His works were intentionally irreverent, often satirical, and aimed to mock the pretensions of the art world as well as the bourgeois values that Dadaists believed were responsible for the horrors of war. Rather than adhering to any specific artistic style or tradition, Picabia embraced a form of rebellion that was as much about the destruction of art as it was about creating new works. His art was often a direct confrontation with the very idea of what art should be, reflecting his belief that art, like society, had become too rigid, self-important, and disconnected from the realities of life. One of the most striking features of Picabia's work was his use of mechanical and industrial imagery, particularly in his series of paintings known as La Sainte Vierge, the Virgin, and Dégénérescence. These works featured drawings of machines, gears, and mechanical parts, which Picabia frequently combined with erotic or absurd elements. His incorporation of these non-traditional subjects reflected Dada's rejection of the fine art canon and an embrace of new, often jarring visual languages. These works were not only a critique of art itself, but also of modernity, which he saw as increasingly dominated by mechanization and the loss of individuality. Picabia's use of absurdity and humor in his work also reflected his Dadaist philosophy. In his famous drawing, Tumum, Picabia used an image of a machine with a caption that read, "You are my lovely little flower," turning the industrial machine into a subject of playful irony. This juxtaposition of the mechanical with the personal, the serious with the absurd, was characteristic of Picabia's anti-art sensibility. By the end of the 1910s, Picabia began to distance himself from Dada, moving toward a more surrealistic and symbolic approach. However, his contributions to Dada's anti-art revolution remained significant. Through his radical imagery, satirical wit, and rejection of traditional artistic values, Picabia helped push the boundaries of what could be considered art. His work encapsulated Dada's spirit of subversion and irreverence, leaving a lasting impact on the development of modern art. Man Ray, photography as a Dada tool. Man Ray, an American-born artist, played a pivotal role in bringing photography into the realm of Dada, using the medium not just to capture reality, but to challenge perceptions of art, reality, and imagination. Though he began his career as a painter and sculptor, it was through photography that Man Ray would make his most lasting contributions to the Dada movement. His innovative techniques, including the creation of rayographs and his surrealist-inflected photographic work, helped redefine what photography could be and placed it at the heart of Dada's anti-art agenda. Man Ray's approach to photography was marked by experimentation and a commitment to the principles of spontaneity and chance, which were central to Dada's rejection of rationality and traditional aesthetics. One of his most famous contributions was the creation of the rayograph, a photographic technique that did not require a camera. Instead, objects were placed directly on photographic paper, and the paper was then exposed to light, creating ghostly, high-contrast images. These photograms captured the interplay of light and shadow in surprising ways, producing abstract forms that were both captivating and unsettling. The rayographs epitomized Dada's embrace of the irrational and the arbitrary, making the process itself an integral part of the artwork. Man Ray's photography also extended beyond his experimental techniques. His portrait photography, particularly of Dada artists and intellectuals in Paris, became iconic for its stark, often surreal quality. He used light, shadow, and composition to create striking, often enigmatic images that suggested both the subject's personality and the conceptual underpinnings of their work. By using photography in such an innovative way, Man Ray blurred the line between art and reality, questioning the ability of any medium to represent the truth. Man Ray's photographs were not limited to the creation of new visual forms. They also engaged with Dada's overarching critique of societal norms. In works like Le Violon Ingres, in which a photograph of a woman's back is transformed into the shape of a violin, Man Ray challenged the viewer's expectations of beauty and objectification. His use of surrealistic imagery and juxtapositions in his photography was a direct reflection of Dada's irreverence toward tradition and its desire to provoke new ways of thinking. Through his groundbreaking work in photography, Man Ray helped to elevate the medium as a tool for Dada's exploration of the absurd, the irrational, and the anti-art. His ability to subvert traditional forms of representation while remaining deeply connected to Dada's radical philosophy of chance, irony, and disruption ensured that his work would leave an indelible mark on both photography and modern art. Chapter 3, Dada in Europe, From Zurich to Berlin. Dada, a movement born in the turbulent environment of World War I, quickly spread across Europe, with different cities becoming important centers of Dadaist activity. Zurich, the birthplace of Dada, provided the initial spark, but soon the movement spread to other major cities such as Berlin, Paris, and Cologne, each of which added its own unique flavor to the development of Dadaist thought and art. As Dada evolved and expanded, it went from being a reactionary force against the horrors of war to a broader challenge to traditional art, society, and culture. Zurich became the first stronghold of Dada thanks to the Cabaret Voltaire, a nightclub founded in 1916 by Hugo Ball, Emmy Hennings, and other artists who were seeking an alternative to the madness of the world. The Cabaret Voltaire quickly became a center for avant-garde performances, with poets, musicians, dancers, and visual artists experimenting with absurdity, noise, and anti-art. Artists like Tristan Tzara and Jean Arp contributed to the establishment of the movement's foundational ideas, combining an intense rejection of tradition with spontaneous, often irrational, creative expression. Zurich Dada was a small, insular group, primarily intellectual, focusing on protest against war and exploring the philosophical aspects of nonsense and the absurd. However, as the war ended and Europe began to recover, Dada expanded its influence, and Berlin became a central hub of the movement. In Berlin, Dada took on a more political and confrontational tone. The city was marked by social and economic instability in the aftermath of the war, and Dada artists in Berlin were deeply engaged with the political turmoil that followed. Led by artists like George Grosz and John Hartfield, Berlin, Dada became known for its sharp critique of both the Weimar Republic's government and the rise of fascism. The Berlin Dadaists used art as a weapon, creating provocative works that satirized the political establishment, exposing the hypocrisy and corruption that they saw at the heart of European society. In addition to its political edge, Berlin Dada also became more aggressive and less focused on traditional artistic mediums. It embraced photomontage, a technique pioneered by Hartfield, which involved cutting and pasting photographs to create new, often jarring images that exposed the dark realities of modern life. This gave Dada in Berlin a distinctly visual and confrontational character, more direct in its challenge to the art world and society at large. While Dada in Zurich and Berlin differed in tone and style, both shared a common commitment to undermining the status quo and breaking free from the constraints of tradition. As the movement moved through Europe, Dada expanded its reach, influencing a wide range of artistic and intellectual fields, from literature to politics to visual arts. Its legacy remains a crucial turning point in the history of modern art, as it pushed the boundaries of what art could be and what it could do in times of crisis. Dada's spread across Europe. Dada began as a reaction to the horrors of World War I in Zurich, but its influence soon spread across Europe, creating an artistic movement that transcended national borders and gave voice to artists disillusioned by the war, societal norms, and the traditional art world. The movement's spread was rapid, as Dadaists found new cities and communities to challenge the conventions of art, culture, and politics. In Zurich, Dada was initially rooted in intellectual and philosophical exploration, with its first major venue being the Cabaret Voltaire. As the war ended and the disillusionment with traditional structures of power continued, artists began to push further, and Dada's expansion into other European cities seemed almost inevitable. The movement found fertile ground in Berlin, where the political instability of the post-war years made the city a hotbed for radical ideas. Berlin Dadaists, led by artists like George Grosz and John Hartfield, became more politically charged, using photomontage and satirical art to criticize both the Weimar government and the looming threat of fascism. Their work was direct, combative, and aimed to expose the corruption and instability of contemporary society. Paris, too, became a key center for Dada. By the early 1920s, the movement had taken root in the French capital, where artists such as André Breton and Francis Picabia began to link Dada with the Surrealist movement. Parisian Dadaists were often more focused on the intellectual and absurdist elements of the movement, with performances, poetry readings, and publications that combined chaos with critique. The French Dadaists, while not as politically focused as their Berlin counterparts, explored themes of irrationality and the rejection of reason, drawing heavily on the theories of Freud and Nietzsche to shape their work. In addition to Zurich, Berlin, and Paris, Dada also made its way to cities like Cologne, where the artistic group around Max Ernst began experimenting with collage and other new techniques. The Dadaists in these cities, although united by a common rejection of the established order, each interpreted the movement's ideals in different ways, influenced by the unique social and political contexts in which they found themselves. Dada's spread across Europe was a powerful testament to its universal message of rebellion and its ability to inspire diverse artistic expressions. Though it was often fragmented and disjointed, Dada's impact was undeniable. Its challenge to the conventions of art and society resonated far beyond the borders of Zurich, leaving an indelible mark on the development of modern art and paving the way for movements like surrealism, abstract expressionism, and conceptual art. The Berlin Dada Group and political engagement. The Berlin Dada Group emerged in the aftermath of World War I, during a time of profound political and social instability in Germany. The collapse of the German Empire, the chaos of the Weimar Republic, and the economic turmoil left many people disillusioned with the established systems of power. For the Berlin Dadaists, this atmosphere of unrest provided fertile ground for the development of their radical, politically engaged art. Unlike the more abstract, intellectual Dada of Zurich, Berlin Dada adopted a direct, confrontational approach that sought to critique not only traditional art forms, but also the political and societal systems that had led to the war and the ongoing instability. The Berlin Dada Group, led by figures such as George Gross, John Hartfield, and Hannah Hoch, became deeply involved in the politics of their time. The group's art was often explicitly anti-authoritarian, anti-bourgeois, and anti-war. Their works targeted both the corrupt political establishment and the rise of fascism, using satire and shocking imagery to provoke the public and question the status quo. In particular, Hartfield's photomontages, collages made from photographs that combined and distorted images to create powerful political statements, became one of the signature techniques of the Berlin Dadaists. His images criticized the growing nationalism in Germany and exposed the hypocrisy of political and military leaders. The Berlin Dadaists saw their work as a form of direct action against the oppressive structures they believed were responsible for the war and the suffering it caused. They used their art not just to represent the world, but to actively change it. For them, art was a tool for social and political transformation, and they believed that the absurdity and irrationality of Dada could expose the absurdity of society itself. By embracing shock tactics, satire, and subversion, the Berlin Dadaists hoped to wake people up to the dangers of totalitarianism and the need for radical change. In addition to their political critiques, the Berlin Dadaists also experimented with new forms of art that reflected their rejection of traditional artistic conventions. They used photomontage, collage, and other mixed media techniques to create works that were not only political, but also visually disruptive, challenging the boundaries of what was considered acceptable art. Their work, often grotesque, jarring, and surreal, was designed to challenge the viewer's expectations and provoke thought. The Berlin Dada Group's political engagement was a key feature of their version of Dada, making their work stand out from other Dada centers in Europe. Their art, driven by a sense of urgency and rebellion, reflected the deep political and social crises of the time and highlighted Dada's potential as a tool for social change. Through their provocative and politically charged creations, the Berlin Dadaists left a lasting impact on both the art world and the broader political landscape. Hannah Hoch and photomontage. Hannah Hoch, a central figure in the Berlin Dada movement, is best known for her innovative use of photomontage, a technique that involved cutting, pasting, and reassembling photographs to create new, often provocative images. Hook's work with photomontage challenged traditional artistic conventions and became a powerful tool for her political and social critique. As one of the few female members of the Berlin Dada group, her contributions were vital in shaping Dada's rejection of conventional art and its engagement with contemporary issues. Hoax photomontages often combined images from mass media, advertising, and scientific sources with fragments of portraits, anatomical studies, and other visual elements, creating unsettling and thought-provoking juxtapositions. She used this technique to critique the societal structures, gender norms, and political ideologies of her time. One of her most famous works, cut with the Dada kitchen knife through the last Weimar Bierbeli cultural epoch in Germany, 1919, is a striking example of her ability to use photomontage to comment on the turbulent political and cultural climate in post-World War I Germany. In this piece, Hoek juxtaposes images of war, politics, and consumer culture, visually representing the chaos and fragmentation of the Weimar Republic. The collage's chaotic nature mirrors the disorienting political and cultural environment of the time. In addition to her political engagement, Hoek's photomontages also address gender and identity, particularly the role of women in society. In a series of works that explored femininity, Hoek used photomontage to critique the portrayal of women in the media and challenge the traditional roles that women were expected to occupy. Her work often depicted women as fragmented, manipulated, or deconstructed, reflecting her concerns with how women's identities were shaped by social expectations and gender norms. By using photomontage, Hoek subverted the idealized images of women in mainstream culture, turning them into complex, multifaceted representations that question the very idea of female beauty and identity. Hoek's innovative use of photomontage also positioned her as an important figure in the broader development of modern art. While the technique had been used by other artists before her, Hoek's political and feminist lens gave it a new power and relevance within the Dada movement. Through her work, she demonstrated how art could challenge the status quo and serve as a form of resistance, questioning the values and ideologies of society. Her contributions to Dada's legacy were essential, and her work continues to inspire and influence contemporary artists today. The Radical Manifestos of Berlin Dadaists. The Berlin Dadaists were known for their aggressive and politically charged approach to art, and their radical manifestos played a crucial role in articulating the movement's ideals and aims. These manifestos, written by key figures such as George Grosz, John Hartfield, and Raoul Hausmann, served as both declarations of artistic intent and direct critiques of the social, political, and cultural conditions of post-World War I Germany. In a time of immense upheaval, their manifestos were designed to provoke, disrupt, and challenge the status quo. The Berlin Dadaists, deeply affected by the aftermath of the war, viewed the political landscape of the Weimar Republic as a breeding ground for corruption, inequality, and the rise of fascism. They saw art as a tool for revolution, believing that traditional forms of art and culture were complicit in the violence and chaos of the war. As a result, their manifestos rejected conventional artistic practices, advocating instead for an art that was radically free, anti-bourgeois, and subversive. The manifestos called for the destruction of established artistic norms and the creation of a new, revolutionary form of art that would reflect the true chaos of the world. One of the most important documents of this period was the first International Dada Fair Manifesto, published in 1920. The fair itself was a bold statement of Dada's political engagement, with works that directly challenged the values of both the art world and the state. The manifesto called for the liberation of art from academic constraints and emphasized the importance of breaking down all societal and artistic hierarchies. This radical call for freedom and rebellion was echoed in many Berlin Dada manifestos, which often used aggressive, provocative language to criticize everything from the media and consumer culture to the political system and bourgeois society. In addition to their critique of politics and culture, The Berlin Dada manifestos were also a reaction to the aestheticism of previous artistic movements. They embraced the absurd, the irrational, and the grotesque, using art to confront the viewer with the harsh realities of life. Through their manifestos, the Berlin Dadaists sought to break away from traditional forms of artistic expression, opting instead for the chaotic, the fragmented, and the unexpected. Their calls for radical change were not limited to the art world. They extended to the broader social and political spheres, urging a complete rethinking of the systems that governed both art and society. The radical manifestos of the Berlin Dadaists were essential in shaping the direction of the Dada movement, particularly in Germany. Through these manifestos, they communicated their rejection of all that had come before them and laid the groundwork for the use of art as a tool for political resistance. Their words were as confrontational as their art, and together they left an indelible mark on the development of modern art and the ongoing struggle for social and political change. Political and social critique in Dada works. Dada, as an art movement, was rooted in a deep political and social critique, with its members using their work to challenge the dominant ideologies of their time. Emerging in the wake of World War I, Dadaists were disillusioned by the devastation caused by the war, the corruption of the political establishment, and the failure of reason and logic to prevent such destruction. Dada was not just an aesthetic movement. It was an outright rebellion against the political, social, and cultural systems that the artists believed had led to the chaos of the war and the ongoing instability in Europe. Their art, often absurd and nonsensical, aimed to disrupt the norms and conventions that they saw as complicit in the world's troubles. Dada's political critique was evident in its rejection of traditional institutions, including the state, the church, and notably, the art world itself. In Berlin, for example, Dadaists like George Gross and John Hartfield produced works that directly attacked the Weimar government, capitalists, and the rise of fascism. Gross's sharp, grotesque caricatures of political figures exposed the hypocrisy and corruption that they believed characterized the ruling elite, while Hartfield's photo montages used the medium to directly confront the dangers of nationalism and militarism. These works were designed to shock and provoke, using satire and humor to criticize the societal structures that the Dadaists found oppressive. Socially, Dada also challenged the conventional gender roles and expectations of its time. Many Dadaists, particularly in Berlin, were outspoken in their rejection of bourgeois morality, and this extended to their treatment of women and sexuality. Works by artists like Hannah Hook confronted the traditional depictions of women in the media and explored how women's identities were shaped by society. Hook's photo montages, in particular, deconstructed the image of womanhood, presenting fragmented and reconstructed images that defied the ideals of feminine beauty and challenged the objectification of women in popular culture. Dada's critique was not confined to political and social institutions, but extended to the very nature of art itself. The movement's rejection of established artistic techniques and forms was a direct critique of the elitism and commercialism of the art world. Dada artists felt that art had become disconnected from the real world and was too often used to reinforce the status quo. By creating works that were intentionally nonsensical, irrational, and provocative, the Dadaists sought to break free from the constraints of tradition and expose the artificiality of artistic conventions. In essence, Dada's political and social critique was woven into the fabric of the movement's very existence. Through their art, the Dadaists used absurdity, satire, and shock tactics to challenge not only the political and social systems of their time, but also the very concept of art itself. Their works continue to resonate as a reminder of the power of art to question, provoke, and resist. Chapter 4: Dada in Paris and the Role of Surrealism. Paris played a crucial role in the development of Dada, particularly in its evolution towards surrealism. While Zurich and Berlin were the original strongholds of Dada, Paris became the site where the movement flourished and morphed into new directions. The city's vibrant artistic and intellectual scene, along with its position as a cultural capital of Europe, made it an ideal environment for the radical experimentation that Dadaists sought. In Paris, Dada took on a more theatrical and performative aspect compared to its roots in Zurich and Berlin. Artists like Francis Picabia and Guillaume Apollinaire were instrumental in bringing Dada to the French capital. The Parisian Dadaists were drawn to the absurdity of life and sought to dismantle the prevailing conventions of art, literature, and society. They expressed their anti-art sentiments through a range of media, including poetry, collage, performance, and visual art. While Dada in Paris retained its core principles of irrationality and rebellion, it began to interact more directly with the broader cultural movements of the time, including Surrealism. One of the most significant developments in Paris was the emergence of Surrealism, a movement that grew out of Dada's rejection of reason and its embrace of the unconscious mind. Led by André Breton, Surrealism took many of Dada's ideas about the absurd and irrational and deepened them with an exploration of the unconscious, dreams, and psychoanalysis. Although the two movements shared common ground, Surrealism distinguished itself from Dada by focusing more on the exploration of human psychology and the search for new, deeper truths about the mind and existence. Dada's emphasis on randomness and the rejection of logical thought gave way in Surrealism to a more systematic investigation of the unconscious, influenced by the ideas of Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. Paris also saw the Dadaists engage with the rapidly evolving art market as they sought to make a name for themselves in a city full of art collectors, patrons, and galleries. However, Dadaists remained defiant against the commercialization of art, seeing their work not as a commodity but as an act of resistance. Even as Surrealism gained more recognition, the spirit of rebellion that defined Dada remained central to many of the artists in Paris. In this way, Dada in Paris marked the end of the movement as an organized collective force and its transformation into Surrealism. While Dada as a movement may have been short-lived, its influence on the development of modern art, especially in the form of Surrealism, is undeniable. Through their exploration of irrationality and the unconscious, Dada and its Parisian offshoots forever altered the course of 20th century art. Dada's arrival in Paris. Dada's arrival in Paris marked a significant turning point in the evolution of the movement. Although Dada had begun in Zurich in 1916 and quickly spread to Berlin, its introduction to the French capital injected the movement with new energy and context. Paris, as a cultural hub of Europe, was already a melting pot of avant-garde ideas, and its intellectual, artistic, and political climate made it an ideal setting for Dada's unconventional, anti-establishment ethos. The city's vibrant artistic community, composed of both French artists and those from across Europe, embraced the rebellious spirit of Dada, though with some adaptations to the unique social and cultural fabric of Paris. Dada's arrival in Paris was largely facilitated by the efforts of key figures like Francis Picabia, who was one of the earliest to bring Dada to the city. Picabia, originally from France but having spent time in New York, was instrumental in bridging the gap between the New York and European Dada scenes. His avant-garde works, including the provocative magazine 391, began to draw the attention of French artists, while his connections with figures like Guillaume Apollinaire and Marcel Duchamp helped introduce Dada to the city's intellectual circles. The movement in Paris was initially met with curiosity, as it was seen as both a direct critique of the art establishment and as an extension of the radical shifts already taking place in art and literature. The arrival of Dada in Paris coincided with the post-war disillusionment that had already begun to shape the city's intellectual climate. Artists and intellectuals, many of whom had witnessed the horrors of the war firsthand, were searching for new ways to express their frustration with traditional society, politics, and culture. Dada's rejection of logic, reason, and conventional artistic techniques resonated deeply with these Parisian artists, who were eager to challenge the status quo. In Paris, Dada took on a more performative and provocative tone, with public events and theatrical performances intended to confront both the art world and the general public with its absurdity. While the movement in Paris remained firmly rooted in Dada's core rejection of traditional art and social norms, it also began to evolve into something new. Here, Dada merged with elements of surrealism, particularly under the influence of André Breton, who became a leading figure in Paris's Dada scene. Surrealism, which grew out of Dada's anarchistic approach, sought a deeper exploration of the unconscious and the irrational, laying the groundwork for future artistic movements. Dada's arrival in Paris thus not only marked a key moment in the movement's expansion across Europe, but also set the stage for its transformation into surrealism, which would go on to redefine modern art in profound ways. The influence of French avant-garde movements. The French avant-garde movements that flourished in the early 20th century played a significant role in shaping the direction of Dada upon its arrival in Paris. By the time Dada began to take root in the city, Paris was already a nexus for radical artistic experimentation, with several movements challenging traditional boundaries of art, literature, and culture. The influence of these movements, including Cubism, Futurism, and Symbolism, can be seen in the ways Dadaists approached the disruption of established norms. Cubism, pioneered by artists like Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque, was one of the most important influences on Dada. By deconstructing the representation of reality and presenting fragmented, multi-perspective views of objects, Cubism introduced a new way of thinking about form and perception. Dadaists, particularly in Paris, took this fragmented approach a step further by abandoning any attempt to represent reality altogether. Instead, they embraced the absurd, the nonsensical, and the irrational. The influence of Cubism on Dada is evident in works that emphasize collage, assemblage, and the destruction of traditional compositional structures. By rejecting the idea of art as representation, Dada artists sought to question the very nature of artistic creation and its connection to the material world. Futurism, another influential avant-garde movement, also made an impact on Parisian Dada. Founded in Italy by Filippo Tommaso Marinetti, Futurism celebrated speed, technology, and the dynamism of modern life, while rejecting the past and tradition. Though Dadaists were critical of the nationalism and militarism associated with Futurism, they shared a similar rejection of established conventions and a desire to break free from the constraints of history. Dadaists, like Futurists, sought to capture the energy of modern life. But rather than celebrating technological progress, they focused on the chaos, destruction, and absurdity of the modern condition. Symbolism, with its focus on the irrational, the mysterious, and the emotional, also contributed to the development of Dada. Though symbolist artists like Stéphane Mallarmé and Odilon Redon were interested in exploring the subconscious and rejecting realism, they did so with a sense of mystery and beauty. Dadaists, by contrast, went beyond the symbolist fascination with the mystical and embraced a more radical approach to breaking down meaning. They celebrated absurdity and irrationality not as a means to evoke deeper truths, but to completely shatter the illusions that art had traditionally upheld. Together, these French avant-garde movements created an environment in which Dada could thrive. Dada was not just a rejection of the artistic traditions of the past, but a direct challenge to the very foundations of society and culture. The Parisian avant-garde's embrace of experimentation, abstraction, and rejection of the conventional provided the perfect backdrop for the Dadaists' radical ideas and artistic practices. Through this interaction, Dada in Paris evolved, incorporating elements of its predecessors while pushing beyond them into new, uncharted territories. The intersection of Dada and Surrealism. The intersection of Dada and Surrealism represents a critical moment in the history of modern art, one in which the two movements overlapped and influenced each other, yet diverged in key philosophical and artistic directions. Both movements emerged from the turbulence of World War I, driven by a shared rejection of conventional art, society, and rationality. However, while Dada was primarily concerned with subverting the status quo through absurdity and chaos, Surrealism sought to delve deeper into the unconscious mind, dreams, and the exploration of human psychology. Dada, with its roots in Zurich and later in Berlin and Paris, was marked by an anti-art stance. It aimed to dismantle established artistic traditions, rejecting reason, logic, and the very concept of beauty in favor of randomness, absurdity, and shock value. The Dadaists, including figures like Marcel Duchamp, Tristan Tzara, and Francis Picabia, employed techniques such as collage, photomontage, and ready-mades to create works that were intentionally nonsensical and provocative. They believed that the rationalism that had driven society to war was the same rationalism that governed the art world, and they sought to disrupt this order with art that was often chaotic, irrational, and seemingly meaningless. Surrealism, on the other hand, was founded by André Breton in 1924, and, while it shared Dada's rejection of rational thought, it moved in a different direction. Surrealism sought not just to rebel against traditional forms of art, but to unlock deeper truths about the human experience, particularly through the exploration of the unconscious mind. Influenced by the psychoanalytic theories of Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, Surrealism aimed to bridge the gap between the conscious and unconscious worlds, using dreams, automatism, and spontaneous expression as tools for artistic creation. Artists like Salvador Dalí, René Magritte, and Max Ernst used surreal imagery to probe into the human psyche, often creating dreamlike scenes that defied logic and rational explanation. The two movements shared a belief in the importance of irrationality, but Dada's approach was more focused on destruction and disruption, while Surrealism sought creation through a deeper understanding of the mind. Many early Surrealists were former Dadaists, and they brought elements of Dada's anti-art attitude into the development of Surrealism. However, as Surrealism evolved, it became more structured and philosophical, seeking to engage with human psychology, mysticism, and the mysteries of existence, whereas Dada remained primarily an act of rebellion. In the end, Dada and Surrealism both left indelible marks on modern art, but their paths diverged significantly. Dada's embrace of absurdity and chaos laid the groundwork for Surrealism's exploration of the unconscious mind, and while the two movements had overlapping goals, their approaches reflected different attitudes toward the purpose and power of art. The role of André Breton in Surrealism's emergence. André Breton stands as one of the central figures in the creation and development of Surrealism. As a poet, writer, and intellectual, Breton played a pivotal role in shaping the movement's philosophical underpinnings and guiding its artistic direction. His deep interest in psychoanalysis, the unconscious mind, and the works of Sigmund Freud would help propel Surrealism into new territory, making it not just a visual art movement, but also a philosophical and psychological inquiry into the nature of human experience. Breton's journey into Surrealism began as a natural progression from his earlier involvement with Dada, where he was initially captivated by the movement's defiance of tradition and its celebration of irrationality. However, unlike Dada, which was fundamentally anti-art and centered around destruction, Breton saw in Surrealism the potential to build a new form of art that could transcend the limitations of reality. He believed that true freedom could be found in tapping into the unconscious mind, where logic and societal constraints had no hold. To Breton, Surrealism was more than an artistic revolution. It was a way to unlock deeper truths about the psyche, freeing the individual from the rationalism and repression imposed by society. In 1924, Breton published the Surrealist Manifesto, a key document in the history of the movement that outlined his vision for Surrealism. In it, he defined Surrealism as pure psychic automatism, a process of creating art without the interference of reason or logic. The manifesto called for the liberation of the mind from the constraints of societal norms, advocating for spontaneous, free-flowing expression that could bridge the gap between the conscious and unconscious realms. This new form of art, according to Breton, would reveal hidden truths and allow humanity to experience life in a more authentic way. The manifesto not only solidified Surrealism's theoretical foundation, but also served as a rallying cry for artists, writers, and intellectuals to join in this collective pursuit of creative freedom. Breton's leadership and his intellectual engagement with Freud's theories of the unconscious mind and dream analysis helped distinguish Surrealism from its Dada predecessor. Whereas Dada sought to disrupt and destroy, Surrealism sought to explore and reveal the unconscious workings of the human mind through art, literature, and other creative mediums. Breton's influence extended to surrealist works that incorporated techniques like automatic writing, dream imagery, and surreal juxtapositions, which sought to expose the hidden layers of the psyche. Throughout his life, Breton remained the guiding force of surrealism, rallying artists and writers under its banner while also seeking to preserve the purity of its ideals. His role in the movement's emergence not only ensured its place in the history of modern art, but also reinforced the notion that art could serve as a powerful tool for psychological and social transformation. Through his leadership and vision, André Breton helped shape Surrealism into a revolutionary force that would leave a lasting impact on the world of art and beyond. Key Dadaists in Paris, Picabia, Duchamp, and others. The arrival of Dada in Paris saw several key figures who played vital roles in shaping the movement's character in the French capital. Among these, Francis Picabia and Marcel Duchamp were perhaps the most influential, as their radical ideas and groundbreaking works significantly impacted the trajectory of Dada and set the stage for the later emergence of Surrealism. These artists, along with others in Paris, used their creative practices to subvert conventional art forms and express their dissatisfaction with the rationalism that had led to the devastation of World War I. Francis Picabia was a pivotal figure in introducing Dada to Paris. Known for his irreverent and satirical approach to art, Picabia's work often sought to challenge both artistic and societal conventions. His works ranged from abstract paintings to mechanical drawings, with a particular focus on the absurdity of industrialization, technology, and human existence. Picabia's famous series of works titled La Sainte Vierge, the Holy Virgin, were a critical examination of the way art, religion, and society were intertwined, often pushing the boundaries of good taste and propriety. His provocative attitude embodied the essence of Dada, rejecting tradition in favor of spontaneous and absurd expression. Marcel Duchamp, another crucial figure, is often considered one of the most significant influences on the development of modern art. His concept of the ready-made, everyday objects elevated to the status of art simply by being chosen and presented as such, radically redefined what could be considered art. Duchamp's most famous work, Fountain, 1917, a porcelain urinal signed with the pseudonym R. Mutt, challenged not only the conventions of what art could be, but also the very institutions that defined artistic value. Duchamp's work questioned the boundaries of creativity and craftsmanship, and his conceptual approach to art influenced generations of artists long after Dada faded from the scene. In addition to Picabia and Duchamp, other key Dadaists in Paris contributed to the movement's evolution. Marcel Janco, who had been involved in the early stages of Dada in Zurich, also participated in the Parisian scene, creating masks and performance art that blended the playful and the subversive. Guillaume Apollinaire, a poet and art critic, embraced Dada's revolutionary spirit, even though he was more aligned with the symbolist movement. His encouragement of the avant-garde and his close relationship with key figures like Picasso and Duchamp helped fuel Dada's rise in Paris. Together, these artists contributed to a Parisian Dada scene that was distinct from its German counterparts, but still deeply engaged in radical experimentation and anti-art sentiment. Their works not only questioned traditional aesthetics, but also served as a pointed critique of the political and social order that had led to the horrors of war. Through their bold ideas and practices, the Dadaists in Paris helped redefine the boundaries of art, laying the groundwork for future movements like Surrealism and beyond. Chapter 5: The Dada Manifestos and Anti-Art Philosophy. Dada was not just an art movement. It was a revolutionary stance against the established norms of society, culture, and art. Central to its philosophy were the Dada Manifestos, which served as declarations of intent, expressions of frustration, and guides to the movement's chaotic energy. These manifestos, written by figures like Tristan Tzara, Hugo Ball, and Richard Huelsenbeck, embodied Dada's rejection of logic, reason, and artistic tradition, emphasizing instead spontaneity, absurdity, and anti-art sensibilities. Tristan Tzara, one of Dada's most vocal proponents, was instrumental in shaping the movement's ideological framework. His Dada Manifesto of 1918 is one of the most famous documents of the movement, serving as both a declaration and an attack on conventional values. In it, Tzara dismissed logic and rationality as tools of oppression and emphasized the necessity of randomness, spontaneity, and anti-establishment attitudes. He famously wrote, "Dada means nothing," reinforcing the idea that the movement rejected meaning itself. His manifesto was intentionally contradictory and provocative, embracing nonsense as a response to a world that had lost its own sense of reason in the wake of World War I. Hugo Ball, who founded the Cabaret Voltaire in Zurich, took a slightly different approach. His Dada Manifesto of 1916 was rooted in the rejection of bourgeois values and artistic traditions. Ball viewed language itself as a tool of control and corruption, which led to his experiments with sound poetry, abstract phonetic compositions meant to break free from conventional linguistic meaning. His manifesto argued for the destruction of structured language and artistic norms, advocating for a return to primal, instinctive expression. His performances, often featuring nonsensical recitations in elaborate costumes, were emblematic of Dada's anarchic spirit. Richard Huelsenbeck, another key Dada figure, introduced the movement's radical ideas to Berlin, where it took on a more overtly political dimension. His Dada Manifesto of 1918 was fiercely anti-establishment, attacking nationalism, militarism, and the hypocrisy of the ruling class. Unlike the more playful absurdity found in Zurich and Paris, Berlin Dada embraced a confrontational and politically charged tone, using manifestos and performances to directly challenge authority. At the core of these manifestos was the philosophy of anti-art, a rejection of art as an institution, commodity, or aesthetic pursuit. The Dadaists refused to see art as something separate from life, and instead sought to integrate it into everyday existence through provocation and disruption. By defying artistic conventions and societal expectations, Dada's manifestos not only shaped the movement's chaotic ethos, but also laid the foundation for future avant-garde movements, including surrealism and conceptual art. The radical manifestos of Dada. The Dada movement was built on a foundation of defiance, chaos, and an outright rejection of traditional artistic and cultural values. Nowhere was this revolutionary spirit more evident than in the radical manifestos produced by its leading figures. These documents served as declarations of intent, rallying cries against societal norms, and expressions of Dada's commitment to nonsense, spontaneity, and anti-art ideals. Unlike traditional artistic manifestos, which sought to define clear objectives or stylistic guidelines, the Dada manifestos often embraced contradiction, absurdity, and a refusal to be pinned down by conventional logic. Tristan Tzara, one of the most vocal and influential Dadaists, played a crucial role in articulating the movement's anarchic philosophy. His Dada Manifesto of 1918 is perhaps the most well-known, serving as both a rejection of artistic and societal traditions and an assertion of Dada's embrace of chaos. In it, Tzara proclaimed, "Dada means nothing," emphasizing that the movement had no singular meaning, goal, or aesthetic. He attacked rationality, morality, and even art itself, suggesting that all established systems of thought were corrupt and complicit in the destruction caused by World War I. His manifesto was intentionally self-contradictory, mirroring the absurdity of a world that had, in the Dadaist view, lost all sense of reason. Hugo Ball, another founding member of Dada, presented an earlier Dada manifesto in 1916 at Zurich's Cabaret Voltaire, where the movement first took shape. Ball's manifesto took aim at language, arguing that it had been corrupted by nationalism, propaganda, and political manipulation. To counter this, he introduced phonetic poetry, abstract performances that stripped language of meaning in order to reclaim its raw emotional essence. His performances, often delivered in elaborate geometric costumes, embodied Dada's embrace of irrationality and spontaneous expression. In Berlin, where Dada took on a more politically charged dimension, Richard Huelsenbeck's Dada Manifesto of 1918 called for direct opposition to bourgeois values, militarism, and nationalism. Unlike Zara's more abstract and poetic declarations, Huelsenbeck's manifesto was pointed and aggressive, denouncing the complicity of art in the structures of power. Berlin Dadaists such as John Hartfield and George Gross translated this radical stance into visual form, using photomontage and satirical illustrations to expose political hypocrisy. These radical manifestos were not just theoretical statements, but active tools of provocation. They challenged the art world, the public, and even the Dadaists themselves, constantly reinventing their stance and refusing to settle into a single ideology. By embracing contradiction and absurdity, the Dada manifestos helped redefine the role of art, laying the groundwork for future avant-garde movements that would continue to challenge and disrupt artistic traditions. Nonsense, irrationality, and rejection of tradition. At the heart of Dada was an unrelenting commitment to nonsense, irrationality, and the rejection of artistic and societal traditions. Emerging in the wake of World War I, the movement was not simply an aesthetic revolution, but a deep expression of frustration with the systems that had led to destruction and chaos. Dadaists saw logic, reason, and traditional values as complicit in the war, and they sought to undermine these principles through radical artistic expressions that defied meaning, coherence, and convention. One of the primary ways Dadaists embraced nonsense was through language. Traditional poetry and literature relied on structure, meaning, and clear communication, concepts Dada sought to dismantle. Figures like Hugo Ball and Tristan Tzara experimented with phonetic poetry, in which words were replaced with meaningless sounds, emphasizing rhythm and expression over logical interpretation. Ball's performances at Zurich's Cabaret Voltaire featured him dressed in eccentric geometric costumes while reciting sequences of guttural noises. This deconstruction of language was more than an artistic statement. It was a direct attack on the idea that words and reason could effectively convey truth in a world so profoundly disordered. Irrationality was also central to the visual arts of Dada. Marcel Duchamp's Ready-Mades, ordinary objects presented as art, challenged the traditional notion that art required skill, originality, or meaning. His infamous fountain, 1917, a urinal signed R. Mutt, upended the art world by questioning the very nature of artistic value. In a similar vein, Francis Picabia created mechanistic drawings that presented humans as senseless machines, mocking the industrial rationality that had led to war. John Arp introduced chance into his artistic process, creating collages by dropping torn paper onto a surface and gluing the pieces where they fell, embracing randomness as a creative force. Dada's rejection of tradition was not limited to artistic techniques. It extended to institutions, authority, and cultural norms. Museums, critics, and galleries were viewed as complicit in the commodification of art, and Dadaists actively sought to disrupt and mock these establishments. Public performances often included absurd spectacles, such as nonsensical lectures, simultaneous poetry readings where multiple people spoke at once, and deliberate acts of provocation designed to elicit confusion and even outrage. By embracing nonsense and irrationality, Dada refused to conform to any singular ideology or aesthetic. It was a movement built on contradiction and destruction, a refusal to engage with the world on its own terms. In doing so, Dada laid the groundwork for later avant-garde movements like surrealism, conceptual art, and punk, proving that art could be a tool of rebellion, absurdity, and unfiltered expression. Dada's anti-art philosophy, challenging aesthetic norms. Dada was not merely an art movement, it was an anti-art revolution that sought to dismantle traditional aesthetic norms and redefine the very purpose of artistic expression. Emerging during the chaos of World War I, Dada rejected the notion that art should be beautiful, meaningful, or serve a higher purpose. Instead, it embraced absurdity, randomness, and provocation as a means of challenging the institutions and values that had led to destruction and war. By opposing conventional artistic ideals, Dadaists sought to break down the barriers between art and life, forcing audiences to question the very definition of creativity. One of the most radical aspects of Dada's anti-art philosophy was its rejection of skill and craftsmanship as prerequisites for artistic legitimacy. Marcel Duchamp's concept of the ready-made epitomized this stance. By selecting everyday objects such as a urinal, Fountain, 1917, or a Bottle Rack, 1914, and presenting them as art, Duchamp challenged the traditional role of the artist as a creator and undermined the idea that art had to be the product of technical mastery. His work provoked outrage and confusion as it forced viewers to reconsider whether artistic value was derived from the object itself or from the context in which it was presented. Dadaists also subverted aesthetic norms through chance and spontaneity, rejecting the idea that art should be meticulously planned or composed. Jean Arp's collage with squares arranged according to the laws of chance, 16 to 1917, was created by tearing pieces of paper and dropping them onto a surface, gluing them where they randomly landed. This method removed the artist's conscious control from the creative process, emphasizing the role of chaos and accident in artistic production. Similarly, the poetry of Tristan Tzara encouraged randomness, with instructions for composing poems by cutting words from a newspaper, shaking them in a bag, and arranging them in the order they were drawn. These techniques defied the rational structure of traditional art and literature, reinforcing Dada's commitment to disorder. Beyond the works themselves, Dada's anti-art philosophy extended to its relationship with the art world. Dadaists actively mocked institutions like museums and galleries, seeing them as complicit in commodifying and sterilizing art. Public performances, such as those at the Cabaret Voltaire in Zurich, were designed to provoke rather than entertain, incorporating nonsensical poetry, disruptive music, and chaotic theatrical acts that defied audience expectations. By challenging aesthetic norms, Dada forced a reevaluation of what art could be. Its radical rejection of tradition paved the way for later avant-garde movements such as surrealism, conceptual art, and fluxus, proving that art could be more than an object. It could be an idea, an act, or even a refusal to participate in the conventional art world at all. The embrace of chaos, humor, and subversion. Dada thrived on chaos, humor, and subversion, using these elements as tools to dismantle traditional art, critique societal norms, and challenge authority. Emerging in the wake of World War I, the movement rejected the idea that art should be logical, structured, or serious. Instead, it embraced randomness, absurdity, and irreverence, turning these qualities into powerful weapons against a world that, in the eyes of the Dadaists, had lost its sense of meaning. Through their unconventional techniques and performances, Dadaists sought to disrupt expectations, provoke reactions, and undermine established institutions. Chaos was at the heart of Dada's creative process. The movement's artists and writers rejected meticulous composition and instead embraced spontaneity and chance. Jean Arp's collages, in which he dropped torn pieces of paper onto a surface and glued them where they fell, exemplified this approach. Tristan Tzara's poetry followed a similar logic, instructing readers to cut words from a newspaper, mix them in a bag, and arrange them in the order drawn. This randomness defied the structured rules of traditional art and literature, suggesting that disorder and accident could be as valid as deliberate composition. Humor was another crucial aspect of Dada's philosophy. Rather than creating art that adhered to conventional beauty or meaning, Dadaists delighted in the absurd. Marcel Duchamp's L8Q, 1919, a reproduction of the Mona Lisa with a mustache and goatee, mocked the seriousness of the art world while also hinting at hidden meanings through its playful title. Francis Picabia's works often featured mechanical drawings with nonsensical captions, poking fun at the glorification of technology and rationality. Dadaists used satire, wordplay, and visual puns to ridicule authority, challenge intellectual pretension, and highlight the absurdity of the modern world. Subversion was perhaps Dada's most radical element, as it actively sought to undermine the structures that governed art, politics, and culture. The movement's manifestos, performances, and artworks were designed to provoke confusion and defy interpretation. Public events often included chaotic, overlapping performances where multiple speakers read unrelated texts simultaneously, creating a cacophony of meaninglessness. By doing so, Dadaists rejected the idea that art should be understood in a conventional way, insisting instead that it should disrupt and challenge its audience. Dada's embrace of chaos, humor, and subversion made it one of the most radical artistic movements of the 20th century. Its defiance of order and tradition paved the way for later avant-garde movements, including Surrealism, Fluxus, and Punk. Through its rejection of seriousness and structure, Dada redefined what art could be, something unpredictable, rebellious, and unapologetically absurd. Dada's rejection of political and cultural establishments. Dada was not just an artistic movement, it was a direct rejection of the political and cultural establishments that Dadaists saw as responsible for the devastation of World War I. Emerging in neutral Switzerland but quickly spreading across Europe and beyond, Dada's anarchic spirit sought to dismantle the systems of power that governed art, politics, and society. Rather than offering a structured ideology or political program, Dada opposed all forms of authority, nationalism, and cultural conformity, using absurdity, provocation, and subversion to challenge the institutions they despised. Dada's relationship with politics was particularly strong in Berlin, where artists like George Gross, John Hartfield, and Hannah Höch directly attacked militarism, capitalism, and authoritarianism. The Berlin Dadaists used photo montage and caricature to ridicule political figures, most notably in Hartfield's scathing anti-fascist works that later targeted Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime. Gross's drawings and paintings depicted the corruption and hypocrisy of the ruling class, exposing the grotesque realities of war profiteers, bureaucrats, and military officers. Unlike the more playful or abstract expressions of Dada in Zurich and Paris, Berlin Dadaists saw their work as a form of political resistance, using satire and visual shock tactics to critique the establishment. However, even in its more absurdist and non-political forms, Dada was a rejection of cultural traditions and artistic norms. The movement despised the institutions that dictated what was considered good or valuable art, particularly museums, galleries, and academies. Marcel Duchamp's ready-mades, such as Fountain 1917, a urinal presented as art, mocked the elitist standards of the art world and questioned the very nature of artistic value. By elevating mass-produced, everyday objects to the status of art, Duchamp and other Dadaists exposed the arbitrary nature of artistic judgment and refused to play by the establishment's rules. Dada also rejected nationalism, which many saw as a root cause of the war. The movement was inherently international, bringing together artists and writers from different countries who shared a common disdain for patriotic rhetoric. The use of nonsensical language and multilingual manifestos was a direct challenge to nationalist ideals, demonstrating that Dada belonged to no single country or ideology. The Dadaists' refusal to adhere to any single philosophy made them difficult to categorize, and this deliberate incoherence was itself a form of defiance. By rejecting political and cultural establishments, Dada redefined the role of art as something beyond beauty or tradition. It became a weapon against authority, a form of resistance, and an assertion that in a world governed by irrationality and destruction, art, too, must embrace chaos. Through its radical opposition to power structures, Dada laid the groundwork for future artistic and political movements that would continue to challenge authority through creativity and rebellion. Chapter 6: Dada in America, New York and Beyond. While Dada originated in Europe, its influence quickly spread across the Atlantic, finding a unique home in New York City. The city's vibrant artistic scene, fueled by European expatriates and American modernists, became a crucial hub for Dada's anti-art ideals. Unlike the overtly political Dada movements in Berlin or the theatrical absurdity of Zurich, New York Dada was characterized by irony, wit, and a deep skepticism toward artistic and cultural institutions. Artists such as Marcel Duchamp, Francis Picabia, and Man Ray brought Dada's spirit of provocation to America, redefining the boundaries of art and challenging the conventions of modernism. Marcel Duchamp was one of the most significant figures in New York Dada. Having arrived in the city in 1915, he immediately began to disrupt traditional notions of artistic value. His concept of the ready-made, ordinary objects transformed into art by the artist's selection, was a direct challenge to the idea that art had to be created with skill or originality. Works such as Fountain, 1917, a urinal signed R. Mutt, and Bicycle Wheel, 1913, a wheel mounted on a stool, questioned the role of the artist and the function of art itself. Duchamp's radical approach deeply influenced the future of conceptual art, laying the groundwork for movements such as surrealism and pop art. Francis Picabia, another key figure in New York Dada, took a more playful and chaotic approach. His early mechanical drawings, such as Here, This is Stieglitz, 1915, parodied the mechanization of modern life while also mocking the seriousness of the art world. He later embraced an anarchic style that combined text, abstraction, and surreal imagery, rejecting any fixed artistic identity. His magazine, SAS 291, named after Alfred Stieglitz's famous gallery, served as a platform for experimental art and Dadaist satire, blending poetry, visual art, and absurd manifestos. Man Ray, an American artist closely associated with Duchamp and Picabia, brought a new dimension to Dada through photography and film. His photographic experiments, including his famous rayographs, cameraless images created by placing objects directly onto photosensitive paper, embraced chance and abstraction, echoing the Dadaist rejection of traditional techniques. His work blurred the lines between art and everyday life, aligning with Dada's goal of dismantling artistic hierarchies. Although Dada never became a large-scale movement in the United States, its ideas profoundly influenced American art. New York Dada helped to set the stage for later avant-garde movements, particularly surrealism and abstract expressionism. Through irony, subversion, and an irreverent approach to artistic traditions, Dada in America challenged the very foundations of art, leaving an enduring legacy that continues to shape contemporary artistic practices. The influence of European Dadaists on New York. The arrival of European Dadaists in New York in the 1910s played a crucial role in shaping the city's avant-garde art scene. While the movement had begun in Zurich as a response to the devastation of World War I, it found fertile ground in New York, where a growing community of modernist artists, intellectuals, and expatriates was already questioning traditional artistic conventions. Figures such as Marcel Duchamp, Francis Picabia, and Jean Cratai brought with them the radical ideas of European Dada, introducing new ways of thinking about art, language, and meaning that would profoundly influence American artists. Marcel Duchamp was the most significant figure in bridging European Dada and the New York art world. Having arrived in 1915, he quickly became a key player in the city's artistic circles. His concept of the ready-made, ordinary, mass-produced objects presented as art directly challenged the traditional expectations of artistic skill and craftsmanship. Works like Fountain, 1917, Assigned Urinal, and Bicycle Wheel, 1913, a wheel mounted on a stool, provoked both admiration and outrage, forcing viewers to reconsider what could be classified as art. Duchamp's irreverent approach aligned with Dada's rejection of artistic authority, and his influence on New York artists was immense, inspiring later avant-garde movements such as conceptual art and minimalism. Francis Picabia, another leading European Dadaist who spent time in New York, brought a more chaotic and energetic approach to the movement. His early mechanical-inspired paintings, such as I See Again in Memory My Dear Udny, 1914, deconstructed human and machine forms into abstract compositions. He also published the magazine Sun 291, which became an important platform for Dadaist and avant-garde ideas. His irreverent, ever-shifting artistic style encouraged American artists to embrace experimentation, abstraction, and the rejection of fixed artistic identities. Jean Cratte, though a lesser-known figure, also contributed to the spread of Dadaist ideas in New York. His works blended cubism, abstraction, and symbolic elements, reflecting the influence of European modernism while aligning with the anarchic spirit of Dada. His collaborations with Duchamp and Picabia helped reinforce Dada's presence in the city. The influence of European Dadaists extended beyond their own work. Their radical approaches inspired American artists such as Man Ray, who experimented with photography and film in ways that echoed Dada's embrace of chance and absurdity. As a result, the movement's ideas became deeply embedded in the foundations of American avant-garde art, setting the stage for future experimental and conceptual movements. Dada's legacy in New York was one of disruption, irreverence, and creative freedom, permanently altering the course of modern art. The 1917 Armory Show and the impact of Duchamp's Fountain. The 1917 Armory Show was a defining moment for modern art in America, but it was Marcel Duchamp's Fountain that would become one of the most controversial and influential works of the 20th century. While the original Armory Show in 1913 had introduced American audiences to European modernism, the 1917 exhibition, organized by the Society of Independent Artists, was meant to celebrate radical artistic freedom. This open exhibition promised to accept all submitted works, a policy that Duchamp, ever the provocateur, sought to challenge with his submission of Fountain, a mass-produced urinal signed R. Mutt. The rejection of Fountain by the exhibition committee, despite their stated open policy, highlighted the limits of their acceptance of avant-garde ideas. The decision sparked a fierce debate about what could be considered art, with some viewing Duchamp's submission as a meaningless prank, while others recognized its deeper implications. By taking an ordinary object and repositioning it as art, Duchamp questioned the necessity of artistic craftsmanship, originality, and aesthetic value. He argued that art was not about the object itself, but about the artist's intention and the context in which it was presented. The impact of Fountain extended far beyond the 1917 exhibition. The scandal surrounding its rejection made it one of the most talked-about artworks of its time, forcing critics, artists, and the public to reconsider the definition of art. Many saw it as a direct attack on traditional artistic institutions, exposing their arbitrariness and resistance to change. This subversive act aligned perfectly with Dada's broader rejection of artistic conventions and its embrace of absurdity and provocation. Duchamp's Fountain would go on to influence countless artists and movements, from surrealism and conceptual art to pop art and postmodernism. The idea that art could be conceptual rather than purely visual challenged the dominance of traditional painting and sculpture, opening the door for performance art, installations, and ready-made objects in contemporary art. Andy Warhol's Brillo boxes, Robert Rauschenberg's found object assemblages, and later conceptual artists like Joseph Kosuth all owed a debt to Duchamp's radical gesture. Though Fountain was rejected in 1917, its legacy endured, solidifying Duchamp's status as one of the most important and influential artists of the 20th century. The work continues to provoke discussion and remains a powerful symbol of Dada's revolutionary spirit, challenging authority, subverting norms, and redefining the very meaning of art. The role of American Dadaists, Marcel Duchamp, Man Ray, and others. While Dada was born in Europe as a response to the horrors of World War I, its influence quickly spread to the United States, where a small but significant group of artists embraced its rebellious spirit. The American Dada movement was largely centered in New York, where figures like Marcel Duchamp, Man Ray, and Francis Picabia helped redefine the boundaries of art. Unlike the politically charged Dada movements in Berlin or the performative absurdity of Zurich, American Dada was more focused on irony, satire, and the deconstruction of artistic tradition. Marcel Duchamp was the most influential figure in American Dada, bringing with him radical ideas that would reshape modern art. Having moved to New York in 1915, he immediately challenged the artistic establishment with his ready-mades, ordinary, mass-produced objects presented as art. His most famous work, Fountain, 1917, a porcelain urinal signed R. Mutt, became one of the most controversial and influential pieces of 20th century art. By submitting it to an exhibition that claimed to accept all works, Duchamp exposed the hypocrisy of the art world and questioned the very definition of art. His impact extended beyond Dada, laying the groundwork for conceptual art, minimalism, and later avant-garde movements. Man Ray, an American artist who became closely associated with Duchamp, played a crucial role in pushing Dada beyond painting and sculpture into photography and film. His experimental photographic works, including his rayographs, images created without a camera by placing objects directly onto photosensitive paper, embodied the Dadaist embrace of chance and innovation. Man Ray's work blurred the lines between art and everyday life, aligning with Dada's mission to dismantle traditional artistic hierarchies. His influence extended into Surrealism, where he continued to explore dreamlike and illogical compositions. Francis Picabia, though originally from France, was another key player in American Dada. His work constantly shifted in style, reflecting his rejection of fixed artistic identities. His machine-inspired drawings, satirical paintings, and nonsensical writings all exemplified Dada's irreverent spirit. Through his magazine 291, named after Alfred Stieglitz's New York gallery, Picabia provided a platform for Dadaist experimentation, mixing text, art, and absurdist manifestos. Although American Dada never formed a cohesive movement, its influence on modern art was profound. The radical ideas introduced by Duchamp, Man Ray, and Picabia reshaped artistic thinking in the U.S., inspiring later avant-garde movements such as abstract expressionism, pop art, and conceptual art. By challenging artistic norms and embracing absurdity, American Dadaists helped redefine what art could be, ensuring that their legacy would continue to shape contemporary artistic practice. Dada and the American avant-garde movement. Dada had a profound and lasting impact on the American avant-garde movement, influencing a generation of artists who sought to challenge the established conventions of art, culture, and society. Arriving in New York during and after World War I, Dada's rejection of tradition and its embrace of absurdity, chance, and the irrational offered a new way for American artists to engage with the rapidly changing world. Dada's influence can be seen across a range of American avant-garde movements, particularly in its contribution to the development of Surrealism, abstract expressionism, and later, pop art. One of Dada's most significant contributions to the American avant-garde was its challenge to the notion of art itself. The movement's use of ready-mades, ordinary, mass-produced objects presented as art, fundamentally changed how artists approached their materials and the role of the artist in creating meaning. Marcel Duchamp's famous Fountain, 1917, a urinal signed R. Mutt, exemplified this idea, prompting a reevaluation of the relationship between art, the artist, and the viewer. This conceptual approach to art making was foundational for later American artists, particularly those involved in conceptual art, who prioritized ideas over physical craft. The acceptance of the everyday object as art would also influence movements such as minimalism, where the distinction between art and object became increasingly blurred. In the 1920s and 1930s, Surrealism, which was born from Dada, took hold in the U.S., with key figures like Man Ray and Max Ernst, bringing Dada's playful absurdity and anti-rationality into American artistic circles. Surrealism's emphasis on the unconscious mind, dreams, and the irrational continued the Dadaist exploration of the boundaries between reality and imagination. The Surrealist use of chance, collage, and automatic drawing was directly informed by Dada's interest in randomness and subversion. Dada also laid the groundwork for abstract expressionism, which emerged in the 1940s. Artists like Jackson Pollock and Mark Rothko embraced the idea that art should express the artist's inner emotions and subconscious. Pollock's use of drip painting, for instance, could be seen as a natural extension of Dada's emphasis on chance and spontaneity. Furthermore, the conceptual and anti-establishment ethos of Dada resonated with the abstract expressionists, who rejected traditional art forms and institutions in favor of personal expression and non-representational art. Even later movements like pop art, led by artists such as Andy Warhol, found inspiration in Dada's questioning of artistic value in consumer culture. Warhol's use of mass-produced objects as art echoed Duchamp's ready-mades, while his fascination with celebrity and mass media reflected Dada's irreverence toward traditional cultural norms. Ultimately, Dada's rebellious spirit and its critique of tradition laid the groundwork for the flourishing of the American avant-garde. The movement's emphasis on experimentation, irony, and subversion continues to resonate with contemporary artists, ensuring that Dada's influence endures in the ever-evolving landscape of modern art. Chapter 7: The Legacy of Dada. The legacy of Dada is profound and enduring, leaving an indelible mark on the development of modern and contemporary art. Despite its brief existence, from 1916 to the early 1920s, Dada's radical ideas and anti-art philosophy reshaped the way artists think about creativity, the role of the artist, and the very nature of art itself. Its rejection of convention, embrace of absurdity, and insistence on spontaneity and chance created a foundation for subsequent avant-garde movements and continue to influence artistic practices today. One of Dada's most significant contributions was its challenge to traditional notions of art. The movement's embrace of ready-mades, as exemplified by Marcel Duchamp's Fountain, 1917, questioned the very definition of art. Duchamp's assertion that anything could be art if the artist declared it so forced a shift away from the idea that art had to be about beauty, skill, or craftsmanship. This radical rethinking paved the way for later conceptual art movements, where the idea or concept behind the artwork became just as important, if not more so, than its physical form. Dada's influence is also seen in the development of Surrealism, which emerged directly from Dada's chaotic spirit. The Surrealists, like André Breton and Salvador Dalí, took Dada's questioning of rational thought and expanded it into the exploration of the unconscious mind, dreams, and automatic processes. Dada's techniques of collage, photomontage, and chance-based creation were embraced and refined by Surrealists, cementing Dada's influence in the history of modern art. The legacy of Dada can be traced in the rise of abstract expressionism, pop art, and conceptual art. Artists such as Jackson Pollock, Robert Rauschenberg, and Andy Warhol were deeply influenced by Dada's embrace of spontaneity, the subversion of artistic norms, and the incorporation of everyday objects into their work. Pollock's use of chance in his drip paintings echoed Dada's desire to break free from traditional techniques, while Warhol's mass-produced works of art, like his Campbell's soup cans, mirrored Dada's questioning of the value and status of art objects. Beyond the visual arts, Dada's influence can be seen in literature, theater, music, and performance art. The movement's use of nonsensical language, poetry of pure sound, and its playful approach to performance have had a lasting impact on experimental theater and performance artists. Dada also influenced later movements like Fluxus, which took the anti-art principles of Dada and extended them into the realm of multimedia and interactive art. Ultimately, Dada's legacy lies in its profound questioning of artistic and cultural norms. By embracing chaos, subversion, and the irrational, Dada opened the door for new forms of artistic expression that continue to shape contemporary art today. The movement's bold rejection of convention and its insistence on freedom of expression remain a cornerstone of artistic practice in the modern era. Dada's influence on surrealism, abstract expressionism, and pop art. Dada's radical rejection of artistic conventions and its embrace of absurdity, chance, and the irrational set the stage for several of the most influential art movements of the 20th century. Its legacy is especially evident in surrealism, abstract expressionism, and pop art, where Dada's ideas about the nature of art, creativity, and society were taken up, adapted, and reimagined. Each of these movements, though distinct in their approaches, owes a great deal to Dada's revolutionary spirit and its subversion of established norms. Surrealism, which emerged in the 1920s, grew directly out of Dada's anti-rationalist stance. While Dada was concerned with chaos and absurdity, surrealists like André Breton and Salvador Dalí took these ideas further by exploring the unconscious mind, dreams, and the irrational through art. Dada's techniques, including collage, photomontage, and the use of chance, were adopted and expanded by surrealists, who sought to depict the subconscious in visual form. Surrealism's interest in the uncanny, the dreamlike, and the nonsensical was a natural extension of Dada's critique of logic and rationality. Duchamp's emphasis on the ready-made also influenced surrealist objects and assemblages, cementing the connection between the two movements. In the 1940s, abstract expressionism in America drew on Dada's emphasis on spontaneity and non-traditional materials, but it also incorporated a deeper emotional and existential exploration. Artists like Jackson Pollock and Willem de Kooning, influenced by Dada's rejection of academic art making, employed chance and automatic techniques to create dynamic, large-scale abstract works. Pollock's drip paintings, in particular, embraced the chaotic energy of Dada, allowing for the physical act of painting itself to become an expression of the subconscious, much like the automatic drawing favored by Dadaists. Abstract expressionism moved beyond Dada's playful irreverence to delve into the emotional depths of the human experience, but the foundational influence of Dada's break with tradition is unmistakable. Dada's impact also found its way into pop art, a movement that emerged in the 1950s and 1960s. Artists like Andy Warhol and Roy Lichtenstein, who questioned the nature of art and consumer culture, were influenced by Dada's use of mass-produced objects as art. Warhol's iconic Campbell's soup cans and his use of repetition in his works mirrored Duchamp's ready-mades, which challenged the uniqueness of the art object. Dada's subversion of high and low culture was echoed in pop art's embrace of commercial imagery and mass production, blurring the lines between fine art and consumer products. In each of these movements, Dada's core principles, anti-art, absurdity, chance, and subversion, continued to shape the direction of modern art. Its irreverence toward tradition and its desire to break down the boundaries between art and everyday life set the stage for the innovations that followed, leaving a lasting impact on the trajectory of 20th century art. The enduring spirit of Dada in contemporary art. The spirit of Dada, with its radical rejection of artistic conventions and its embrace of absurdity, spontaneity, and subversion, continues to resonate in contemporary art. Though the movement itself was short-lived, its influence has rippled through the decades, shaping the way artists approach creativity, materials, and social critique. Today, Dada's legacy can be seen in a wide variety of contemporary art practices, from conceptual art to performance, and even in the realms of social activism and digital art. The movement's defiance of tradition and its embrace of chaos, humor, and chance remain vital forces in the evolution of modern artistic expression. One of the most significant ways Dada's spirit endures in contemporary art is through the continued use of ready-mades and found objects. The notion that everyday, mass-produced items can be transformed into art is foundational to much contemporary conceptual art. Artists like Damien Hirst and Jeff Koons often use consumer goods and mass media imagery to critique culture, echoing Dada's strategy of questioning the value of traditional art objects. Koons' inflatable sculptures and Hirst's diamond-encrusted skull both reference Duchamp's ready-mades in their elevation of ordinary objects to the status of art. Dada's influence also persists in the realm of performance and socially engaged art. Many contemporary artists, such as Marina Abramović and the Guerrilla Girls, challenge social norms and critique established power structures, much in the same way Dada artists used performance to disrupt societal expectations. Abramović's immersive, often confrontational performances echo the radical spirit of Dada's live events, which aim to break down the boundaries between the audience and the artist. Similarly, the Guerrilla Girls' politically charged art and activism continue Dada's tradition of using art to address cultural and political issues with humor and satire. Digital and internet-based art have also embraced Dada's experimental, boundary-pushing ethos. The fluidity of online culture, where images, memes, and information constantly shift and mutate, mirrors Dada's embrace of chaos and nonsensical juxtapositions. The work of contemporary digital artists, who often use randomization, glitch art, and absurd online interactions, reflects Dada's continued exploration of the arbitrary and the unexpected in the creation of meaning. The enduring spirit of Dada in contemporary art reveals how the movement's radical ideas have transcended their time, influencing new generations of artists. Dada's ability to question, disrupt, and subvert continues to challenge artistic, social, and political norms, ensuring its legacy lives on in the art of today. Whether through conceptual art, performance, or digital media, the irreverence and freedom that Dada championed remains central to the continued evolution of art in the 21st century. Dada's legacy in performance, theater, and literature. Dada's influence extends far beyond the visual arts, having a significant impact on the realms of performance, theater, and literature. The movement's radical questioning of traditional artistic forms, its embrace of absurdity, and its rejection of reason and logic paved the way for new forms of creative expression that continue to resonate in contemporary art and performance. Dada's approach to these disciplines was often provocative, challenging the very notion of what constituted a performance, play, or literary work. In performance and theater, Dadaists sought to break down the barriers between the audience and the artist, often creating works that defied conventional narrative structure, traditional staging, and predictable content. Their performances were intended to shock, provoke, and engage viewers in new ways. The famous Cabaret Voltaire in Zurich, where Dada originated, became a hub for spontaneous, experimental performances that combined poetry, music, dance, and absurdist drama. These performances were deliberately chaotic, irrational, and nonsensical, rejecting the notion of coherent storytelling. Dadaist performances often included nonsensical speeches, outlandish costumes, and audience participation, all designed to challenge conventional expectations of art and theater. In literature, Dada rejected traditional language and narrative structures, embracing nonsensical language, fragmentation, and disjointed forms. Dada poets like Hugo Ball, Tristan Tzara, and Kurt Schwitters employed sound poetry and irrational combinations of words to break down the barriers between the spoken and written word. Tzara's Dada manifestos exemplify this rejection of conventional language with their use of absurd, disjointed ideas and playful attacks on linguistic norms. The idea of chance also played a significant role in Dada literature, as poets experimented with random word selection, cut-up techniques, and automatic writing to create works that rejected coherent meaning in favor of spontaneity and unpredictability. Dada's impact on literature is also visible in the development of later avant-garde movements, particularly Surrealism. Surrealists like André Breton were influenced by Dada's experimentation with automatic writing and chance, pushing the boundaries of language further into the realm of the unconscious mind. The Surrealists' embrace of dreamlike, non-logical associations and free association in writing was directly informed by Dada's rejection of rationality and traditional narrative forms. Dada's legacy in performance, theater, and literature has persisted into contemporary avant-garde and experimental practices. The idea that art should not conform to established norms, that it should disrupt and challenge conventional forms, has been embraced by performance artists, theater groups, and writers who continue to push boundaries today. Whether through absurdist theater, conceptual literature, or experimental poetry, Dada's spirit of rebellion and its commitment to breaking down artistic conventions remain an integral part of the creative landscape. Dada's role in deconstructing art and culture. Dada played a pivotal role in deconstructing the traditional notions of art and culture in the early 20th century. Emerging as a reaction against the horrors of World War I and the societal structures that led to it, Dadaists sought to challenge and dismantle the established systems of art, politics, and cultural norms. Through its radical rejection of traditional aesthetics, Dada not only questioned the concept of what art could be, but also undermined the social and political values that art had long been tied to. At the heart of Dada was a rejection of the idea that art should be a reflection of beauty, order, or reason. Dadaists, led by figures such as Marcel Duchamp, Tristan Tzara, and Hugo Ball, embraced chaos, randomness, and absurdity in their work. Duchamp's ready-mades, such as Fountain, 1917, challenged the very definition of art by presenting everyday objects as art pieces simply by the act of their selection. This shift in thinking broke down the distinction between high art and everyday life, questioning the traditional role of the artist as a creator of beautiful, skillfully made objects. By elevating mass-produced, mundane objects into the realm of art, Dadaists challenged the notion that art should be crafted with care and intention. Dada's deconstruction of art extended to its critique of cultural and social norms. The movement's embrace of irrationality and nonsense was a direct response to the rigid structures and expectations of bourgeois society. In rejecting logic, order, and meaning, Dada sought to expose the absurdity of cultural conventions and the social systems that perpetuated them. Its irreverent use of humor, parody, and satire made clear that traditional values were arbitrary and often oppressive. This attack on cultural norms was not limited to the realm of art, but extended to politics and religion, with Dadaists using their work to critique the institutions and ideologies that had led to the destruction of war. Dada's radical stance also played a crucial role in shifting the direction of art away from representational forms and towards abstraction and conceptual art. Its refusal to adhere to the traditional methods of painting, sculpture, and literature influenced later avant-garde movements such as Surrealism, Futurism, and the Bauhaus. These movements built on Dada's rejection of realism and its embrace of abstraction, offering new ways for artists to engage with the world without relying on conventional representations. Dada's impact on art and culture cannot be overstated. It not only transformed the way artists created, but also reshaped the way society viewed art's role in shaping culture. By deconstructing established norms, Dada opened up new possibilities for artistic expression, laying the groundwork for the experimental and conceptual art movements that followed. Its legacy continues to influence contemporary artists, reminding us of the power of art to challenge, disrupt, and reimagine the world around us. Chapter 8, Dada and Modern Thought. Dada's influence extended far beyond the confines of the art world, shaping the broader intellectual landscape of the 20th century. Emerging in the midst of political upheaval, global conflict, and technological advancements, Dada resonated with the growing disillusionment toward traditional structures of thought, reason, and authority. It was a movement born out of a desire to upend conventional wisdom and challenge the established norms that had been complicit in the devastation of World War I. In doing so, Dada contributed to the intellectual currents of modern thought affecting philosophy, psychology, politics, and the evolving relationship between art and culture. At the core of Dada was its profound skepticism of rationalism and logic, which were seen as contributing to the mechanized brutality of war. The movement rejected the Enlightenment ideals of reason, progress, and scientific objectivity that had underpinned Western thought for centuries. This critique aligned with the ideas of existentialists such as Jean-Paul Sartre and Friedrich Nietzsche, who questioned the stability of truth, morality, and identity. Dada's embrace of irrationality, absurdity, and spontaneity offered an alternative to the rigidity of established systems of thought, positioning itself as a rebellion against the idea that reason could ever fully comprehend or control human experience. Dada's rejection of conventional structures also influenced the fields of psychology and philosophy. The movement's exploration of the subconscious and its embrace of chance and randomness reflected the growing interest in psychoanalysis and the ideas of Sigmund Freud. Dadaists, particularly in their use of automatic writing and irrational imagery, tapped into the unconscious mind in much the same way that Freud encouraged patients to explore repressed thoughts and desires. This alignment with psychoanalytic ideas marked a shift in the way artists and thinkers began to understand the relationship between the mind, perception, and reality. Politically, Dada's radical stance against bourgeois society and institutional authority aligned with the growing revolutionary movements of the early 20th century. The Dadaists' disdain for nationalism, militarism, and organized religion mirrored the anti-establishment sentiments that fueled social and political upheaval across Europe. While Dada itself was not a political movement in the traditional sense, its critique of authority and its subversion of cultural norms provided fertile ground for future revolutionary ideologies, particularly in the rise of movements like Surrealism and the Situationist International. Ultimately, Dada's rejection of established norms and its embrace of the absurd created an intellectual space for new ideas to flourish. By challenging the authority of reason, tradition, and social order, Dada played a key role in shaping the modern intellectual climate, influencing everything from philosophy to politics, psychology, and cultural theory. Its radical approach to art and thought has continued to inspire contemporary intellectual and artistic movements, ensuring its place as a transformative force in the evolution of modern thought. Dada's influence on philosophy and critical theory. Dada's impact on philosophy and critical theory was profound, extending far beyond its role as an artistic movement. Its radical rejection of reason, logic, and established conventions played a crucial role in shaping the intellectual currents of the 20th century. By questioning the very foundations of art, culture, and society, Dadaists engaged deeply with philosophical and theoretical ideas, influencing a wide range of thinkers and movements, particularly existentialism, postmodernism, and critical theory. At the heart of Dada was its critique of rationalism, a core tenet of Enlightenment thought. Dada rejected the idea that reason could explain or control human experience, particularly in light of the atrocities of World War I. This rejection of rationality resonated with existentialist philosophers such as Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, who explored themes of absurdity, meaninglessness, and the limits of human understanding. Like Dadaists, existentialists confronted the absurdity of existence and the inability of reason to provide answers to life's fundamental questions. Dada's embrace of the irrational, the nonsensical, and the chaotic provided a way to challenge the conventional assumptions about truth, meaning, and identity, aligning it with the existentialist rejection of universal meaning and absolute truths. Dada also played a significant role in the development of postmodern philosophy, particularly in its approach to language and meaning. The Dadaists' use of nonsensical language, wordplay, and chants as tools for creative expression foreshadowed later post-structuralist and deconstructivist ideas. Thinkers like Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, and Roland Barthes were influenced by Dada's skepticism toward language as a stable means of communication. Dada's practice of undermining the coherence of language and narrative helped to pave the way for the postmodern critique of the idea that language could represent an objective reality. This dissolution of meaning in art and culture mirrored postmodern thought, which contended that meaning is fluid, subjective, and always contingent on context. Moreover, Dada's subversion of traditional art forms and rejection of authority had a significant influence on critical theory, particularly the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School thinkers, including Theodor Adorno and Herbert Marcuse, were concerned with the role of culture in maintaining social order and perpetuating dominant ideologies. Dada's disruption of cultural norms, its rejection of high art, and its embrace of countercultural expression aligned with the Frankfurt School's critique of the commodification of culture and the way art was used to legitimize the status quo. In essence, Dada's radical rejection of authority, rationality, and traditional structures made it a key precursor to many of the philosophical and critical theories that emerged in the 20th century. Its challenge to language, meaning, and social order helped shape existentialism, postmodernism, and critical theory, leaving a lasting legacy in contemporary philosophy. Through its avant-garde approach, Dada opened up new ways of thinking about reality, identity, and culture, continuing to influence intellectual discourse today. The connection between Dada and postmodernism. Dada and postmodernism, though separated by several decades, share a deep and fundamental connection in their approach to art, culture, and society. Both movements emerged as reactions to the dominant ideologies and cultural norms of their respective times, challenging traditional understandings of meaning, aesthetics, and authority. While Dada was born out of the trauma of World War I and the disillusionment with reason, postmodernism arose in the latter half of the 20th century, influenced by the social, cultural, and intellectual shifts of the post-World War II era. Despite their differences in context, both movements employ similar strategies in their rejection of the conventional and their embrace of the absurd, the fragmented, and the nonsensical. At the core of both Dada and postmodernism is a critique of the grand narratives and established structures that have traditionally governed culture and knowledge. Dadaists rejected the rationalism, order, and conventions that had led to the horrors of war, seeking to break down established systems in favor of chaos, spontaneity, and randomness. Postmodernism, similarly, challenges the idea of objective truth and universal meaning, questioning the authority of language, culture, and the notion of an all-encompassing narrative. Both movements engage in a critique of reason, rejecting the Enlightenment's trust in logic and scientific objectivity, and instead highlighting the instability, subjectivity, and plurality of meaning. One of the key connections between Dada and postmodernism lies in their use of irony, playfulness, and pastiche. Dada was notorious for its use of humor, absurdity, and nonsensical elements to subvert expectations and expose the contradictions in society. This approach foreshadowed the postmodernist tendency to mix high and low culture, break down distinctions between serious and trivial subjects, and employ playful or ironic references to art history, literature, and popular culture. For example, the Dadaists' ready-mades, like Duchamp's Fountain, deconstructed the traditional boundaries of what could be considered art, an idea that echoes in postmodern art's use of appropriation and pastiche. Both movements also challenged the notion of authorship and individual genius. Dada's use of chance and collective creation blurred the lines between the artist and the audience, reflecting the postmodern emphasis on the collapse of the author's authority and the idea that meaning is co-constructed by the viewer or reader. In literature, Dada's random, fragmented, and non-linear writing techniques, such as in Sarah's cut-up method, presaged the postmodern interest in fragmented narratives, unreliable storytelling, and deconstructed texts. Ultimately, Dada laid much of the groundwork for postmodernism by questioning established norms and pushing the boundaries of what could be considered art or culture. Its radical, anti-establishment ethos and its embrace of absurdity, randomness, and subversion of meaning directly influenced postmodern thought and aesthetics, making Dada an essential precursor to the postmodern movement. The two share a common legacy in their skepticism toward traditional values, their rejection of coherence, and their embrace of a multiplicity of perspectives, ensuring that Dada's influence continues to shape contemporary culture and philosophy. Dada's exploration of the absurd and the meaning of art. Dada's exploration of the absurd was one of its defining characteristics, acting as a radical response to the horrors of war and the rigid structures of traditional society. Emerging during and after World War I, Dada sought to defy conventional wisdom by embracing chaos, irrationality, and the nonsensical. For the Dadaists, the absurdity of the world, exemplified by the brutal and senseless destruction of war, could not be rationalized or contained within the boundaries of reason, logic, or established artistic norms. This led to a profound reevaluation of the very nature of art itself, questioning its purpose, meaning, and the assumptions underlying its creation and appreciation. One of the core aspects of Dada was the rejection of traditional notions of beauty, order, and representational art. For Dadaists, art was no longer about creating aesthetically pleasing or meaningful representations of the world. Instead, it was about breaking free from the constraints of tradition and allowing for the exploration of the chaotic, the absurd, and the irrational. The idea of art for art's sake was subverted, and art was instead viewed as a tool for subversion, provocation, and exploration. By creating works that were deliberately nonsensical or absurd, the Dadaists sought to dismantle the established definitions of art and expose its constructed nature. Marcel Duchamp's ready-mades, everyday objects presented as art, are perhaps the most iconic example of Dada's challenge to traditional conceptions of art. By elevating objects such as fountain, 1917, a urinal, to the status of art simply through the act of selection, Duchamp questioned what could truly be considered art. This challenge to conventional ideas of artistic value marked a shift in the way artists and thinkers approached the very idea of art. The meaning of art was no longer rooted in the object itself or its form, but in the concept and intention behind it, prompting new perspectives on how art could be understood and appreciated. Dada's embrace of absurdity also extended to its use of humor, parody, and irony. The Dadaists often employed these tools to subvert established norms and poke fun at the seriousness of cultural institutions, intellectualism, and traditional aesthetics. They believed that in a world rife with absurdity and meaninglessness, the role of art was not to provide comforting truths or representations, but to challenge and disrupt. This led to performances, collages, and poems that defied conventional expectations, forcing audiences to confront the absurdity of existence and the arbitrary nature of cultural values. Ultimately, Dada's exploration of the absurd marked a revolutionary shift in the understanding of art. By rejecting the traditional boundaries of artistic creation and embracing chaos, randomness, and nonsensical expression, Dada forced a reconsideration of what art could be, pushing the boundaries of creativity and meaning. In doing so, it laid the groundwork for many of the avant-garde movements that followed, continuing to influence contemporary art and philosophy in its search for meaning in a seemingly indifferent world. The concept of anti-art in contemporary artistic movements. The concept of anti-art, as pioneered by the Dadaists, has had a profound and lasting impact on contemporary art, influencing a range of artistic movements and practices that challenge the traditional definitions and boundaries of art. Anti-art is inherently subversive, rejecting established norms, conventions, and the very idea of what constitutes art. Rather than conforming to aesthetic standards or creating works that provide clear, understandable meaning, anti-art emphasizes chaos, irreverence, and the rejection of artistic authority. The Dadaists were the first to fully articulate this idea, using absurdity, randomness, and irreverence to undermine the art world's conventional values. Their legacy can be seen in many contemporary movements that continue to explore and expand the concept of anti-art. One of the most direct heirs of Dada's anti-art philosophy is the Fluxus movement, which emerged in the 1960s. Like Dada, Fluxus artists embrace chance, absurdity, and the deconstruction of art's traditional boundaries. Fluxus is known for its happenings, which were often spontaneous, participatory events that blurred the line between art and life. These events frequently incorporated everyday objects and random elements, similar to the Dadaists' ready-mades, and emphasized the idea that art could be found in the most mundane or unexpected places. Fluxus artists, much like their Dada predecessors, rejected the notion that art must be a commodity or a fixed object to be valued, instead promoting the idea that art could be an ephemeral experience or a participatory act. Another key manifestation of anti-art in contemporary practice is the development of conceptual art. Conceptual artists, such as Saul LeWitt and Joseph Kosuth, focused on the idea or concept behind the artwork rather than the finished object itself. In this way, conceptual art de-emphasized traditional notions of craftsmanship and beauty, focusing instead on intellectual engagement and the questioning of art's role in society. Like Dada, conceptual art often questioned the institutionalized systems that define art and its value. By prioritizing ideas over form, conceptual artists continued the Dadaist exploration of art as a concept to be manipulated and redefined. Street art and graffiti also carry traces of Dada's anti-art philosophy. Artists like Banksy and Jean-Michel Basquiat challenged the boundaries of the art world by taking their work out of galleries and into public spaces, using urban environments as canvases. The defiance of established art institutions and the use of art as a tool for social and political commentary resonate with the anti-art spirit of Dada, as both movements aim to democratize art and provoke critical reflection on societal norms. Finally, contemporary art movements that focus on deconstructing identity, such as feminist art, queer art, and post-colonial art, also share the Dadaist ethos of challenging established values and norms. These movements use art to question dominant cultural narratives around gender, sexuality, race, and power, often employing strategies of disruption, irony, and parody to challenge the status quo. In conclusion, the concept of anti-art has evolved from Dada's radical rejection of conventional artistic and cultural norms into a wide array of contemporary artistic practices that continue to defy categorization, question authority, and explore the boundaries of art itself. From fluxus and conceptual art to street art and identity-based practices, the legacy of Dada's anti-art philosophy remains a cornerstone of contemporary artistic expression, continuing to challenge and redefine what art can be. Chapter 9, Dada's Decline and Its Final Impact. Dada as a formal movement began to lose momentum in the early 1920s, largely due to the changing political and cultural landscape in Europe and the growing influence of other avant-garde movements. While Dada's chaotic, anti-art ethos had resonated deeply with artists and intellectuals during the aftermath of World War I, its initial purpose of rejecting the traditional and absurdly critiquing societal norms became increasingly difficult to sustain. As the political and social climate shifted in the 1920s, many of Dada's leading figures moved on to other endeavors, most notably the development of Surrealism, a movement that would adopt some of Dada's strategies, but offer a more structured and philosophically grounded approach to artistic expression. The Dada movement's decline was marked by the fracturing of its original centers, particularly in Zurich, Berlin, and New York. In Zurich, key figures like Tristan Tzara began to distance themselves from the movement, and the once vibrant Cabaret Voltaire was shut down. In Berlin, the political turmoil and increasing rise of fascism pushed Dada artists to either embrace more explicitly political engagement or abandon the movement altogether. Similarly, in New York, Dada's influence began to fade as the city's artistic scene began to gravitate more towards the emerging abstract expressionism and the growing popularity of modernism. However, even as Dada began to fade as a cohesive movement, its impact on the future of art and culture remained profound. The legacy of Dada was particularly evident in the rise of Surrealism. André Breton, who had been involved in Dada in Paris, broke away to form the Surrealist movement, which absorbed many of Dada's ideas, such as the embrace of chance and the irrational, while introducing new principles, including the exploration of the unconscious and dream imagery. Surrealism continued Dada's spirit of rebellion, albeit in a more organized and philosophically developed form. Beyond Surrealism, Dada's influence permeated throughout 20th century art, shaping the development of movements such as pop art, conceptual art, and fluxus. The notion that anything could be art, whether found objects, everyday materials, or performance, became an enduring theme in contemporary art practices. Dada's rejection of the traditional art market and the commodification of art left an indelible mark on how contemporary artists approach the creation and presentation of art. Its questioning of authority, cultural institutions, and societal norms continues to inform the work of artists who challenge the boundaries between art, culture, and politics. In essence, while Dada as an organized movement dissipated by the mid-1920s, its revolutionary ideas and artistic practices continued to shape the course of modern and contemporary art. The movement's embrace of the absurd, its challenge to artistic conventions, and its ability to provoke audiences to question their assumptions about art and society ensured that Dada's influence would resonate long after its decline. Dada remains an essential part of the broader history of art, serving as a radical foundational force in the development of 20th and 21st century artistic expression. The fragmentation of the Dada movement. The Dada movement, which began as a collective response to the horrors of World War I and the absurdity of societal conventions, ultimately fragmented in the early 1920s. What started as a cohesive, radical force quickly evolved into a series of disparate, geographically separated groups. This disintegration was largely driven by the very tensions that Dada had sought to expose: internal differences among its participants, changing cultural climates, and the broader historical shifts occurring at the time. One of the key factors contributing to Dada's fragmentation was the movement's inherently anti-establishment and anti-authoritarian nature. While this spirit of rebellion unified artists in their rejection of traditional art forms, it also led to ideological disagreements that splintered the movement. Dada's leaders, such as Tristan Tzara, Hugo Ball, and Marcel Duchamp, had different visions for the movement's direction. In Zurich, the Cabaret Voltaire, which had served as the birthplace of Dada, became less of a meeting place for artists and intellectuals and more a space for individual artistic expression. As the Cabaret Voltaire faded, the movement's collective spirit began to dissolve, and the artists in Zurich started to pursue their own separate interests. Similarly, the Dada group in Berlin, while initially united in their anti-war stance, became increasingly divided over the political direction the movement should take. Some Berlin Dadaists, like George Gross and John Hartfield, began to adopt more explicit political positions, using Dada as a platform to critique the rise of fascism and social injustice. In contrast, other Dadaists in Berlin, like Raoul Hausmann, remained focused on the rejection of artistic conventions and the absurdity of everyday life, refusing to engage with political issues as directly. This divergence created a fracture in the Berlin group, as well as a growing sense that Dada's purpose and method were becoming unclear. The New York Dada scene, similarly, faced challenges that led to its disintegration. While Dada flourished briefly in the city, with key figures like Duchamp and Man Ray creating a unique American iteration of the movement, the energy around Dada soon waned. The rise of new movements, such as abstract expressionism, and the increasingly commercialized nature of the New York art world made Dada's anti-art stance harder to maintain. Additionally, As artists sought new avenues for creative expression, many found that their exploration of the absurd and the rejection of conventional norms had run its course, leaving them to evolve into different artistic directions. Ultimately, Dada's fragmentation was not a sign of failure, but rather a natural consequence of its radical nature. By questioning everything, including its own coherence, Dada opened the door for new movements to emerge and for artists to continue pushing the boundaries of what art could be. Despite its fragmentation, Dada's revolutionary spirit laid the groundwork for a multitude of 20th century artistic developments, from surrealism to conceptual art, ensuring that its legacy would continue long after the movement itself had dispersed. The shifting tides, Dada's decline after World War I. Dada's decline after World War I was not a sudden or straightforward collapse, but a complex shift in direction driven by the changing post-war context. The movement, which had arisen as a direct reaction to the atrocities and absurdity of war, began to lose momentum as the war's immediate impact faded, and the world entered a new phase of recovery and reconstruction. The initial unity and radical energy that had defined Dada dissipated as its key figures pursued different paths, both artistically and politically. One of the primary reasons for Dada's decline was the exhaustion of its core principles. Dada had thrived on the shock of the new, challenging the very foundations of art, culture, and society. But as the movement gained attention and influence, its tactics became familiar. What had once been a startling critique of the establishment began to feel like a repetitive gesture rather than a revolutionary force. The very absurdity that Dadaists had embraced in their works began to lose its ability to shock or provoke, leading many artists to question the movement's future. As political and social conditions in Europe began to stabilize after the war, the urgency that had fueled Dada's anarchistic spirit began to diminish. The aftermath of the war had left artists feeling disconnected and disillusioned, but by the early 1920s, many began to seek new forms of expression. This period saw the rise of surrealism, a movement closely connected to Dada, but with a more focused philosophical and artistic framework. While surrealism carried forward Dada's subversive ethos, it was less chaotic and more oriented towards exploring the unconscious, dreams, and psychological states, giving it a new direction that Dada had not fully embraced. This shift attracted many former Dadaists, such as André Breton and Paul Eluard, who felt that the time had come for a more structured movement. In addition to these internal shifts, Dada's decline was also influenced by external factors. The political climate in Europe, particularly the rise of fascism and nationalism, posed challenges for Dada's continued existence. Many Dadaists, especially in Berlin, found themselves increasingly engaged in political activism, which pulled them away from the purely aesthetic and anti-art concerns that had originally defined the movement. The artistic climate was also changing, with new movements such as constructivism and abstract expressionism offering alternative means of engaging with post-war realities. By the mid-1920s, the Dada movement had largely fragmented, with its major centers of activity in Zurich, Berlin, and New York dissolving. However, despite its decline as a cohesive movement, the ideas and philosophies of Dada persisted, leaving an indelible mark on the trajectory of modern and contemporary art. The rejection of convention, the questioning of societal values, and the embrace of chance and absurdity would continue to inform the work of future generations of artists. The transition to surrealism and other movements. As Dada began to decline in the early 1920s, many of its core members sought new avenues for artistic and intellectual expression. The transition from Dada to surrealism was one of the most significant shifts in the history of modern art, as it marked a move from Dada's chaotic, anti-establishment antics to a more focused and psychologically driven exploration of the human mind. Surrealism, led by former Dadaist André Breton, inherited many of Dada's tactics, such as the rejection of conventional aesthetics, but sought to ground them in a deeper philosophical framework. While Dada had focused primarily on the absurdity of the world and the senselessness of war, Surrealism was more concerned with the unconscious mind, dreams, and the irrational aspects of human experience. Surrealist artists like Salvador Dali, René Magritte, and Max Ernst used dreamlike imagery, bizarre juxtapositions, and distorted realities to explore the workings of the unconscious. Unlike Dada, which had often been purely destructive in its approach, Surrealism aimed to create new meaning from the irrational, positioning itself as a creative force rather than a purely nihilistic one. The transition from Dada to Surrealism was also shaped by the growing interest in psychology, particularly the theories of Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. Surrealists adopted Freud's ideas about the unconscious and dreams as a basis for their art, believing that by tapping into the subconscious, they could access a deeper truth about the human experience. This shift from Dada's more random and spontaneous approach to Surrealism's methodical exploration of the mind represented a more structured, though still avant-garde, approach to understanding and portraying the world. At the same time, other movements were emerging in the post-war period that were influenced by Dada's rejection of artistic conventions. The Russian constructivist movement, which emerged in the years following the Russian Revolution, rejected traditional art in favor of a functional, politically engaged art that could serve the needs of society. Constructivist artists like Vladimir Tatlin and El Lissitzky sought to create art that was useful and industrial, often working in the realms of architecture and design. In America, abstract expressionism began to take root, with artists like Jackson Pollock and Mark Rothko exploring non-representational forms of expression. While not directly related to Dada, abstract expressionism shared Dada's emphasis on spontaneity and the breakdown of traditional artistic structures. The movement's focus on emotion, individual expression, and process owed much to the spirit of Dada, even if it was more introspective and less overtly political. In conclusion, the transition from Dada to Surrealism and the rise of other artist movements after World War I represent a shift in the priorities of artists who had once embraced Dada's rejection of convention. These movements, while building on Dada's radical approach, sought new ways to engage with the world, whether through the exploration of the unconscious mind, the reimagining of social function in art, or the abstraction of human experience. The legacy of Dada's anti-art philosophy lived on in these movements, ensuring that its impact would continue to shape the course of modern and contemporary art. Dada's lasting influence on the evolution of art. Though Dada as a cohesive movement had largely dissipated by the mid-1920s, its influence on the evolution of art is undeniable and far-reaching. Dada's radical approach to art making, characterized by its rejection of traditional aesthetic values, its embrace of absurdity, and its celebration of chance, left an indelible mark on countless artistic movements that followed. The Dadaists' challenge to the very definition of art opened the door for subsequent generations of artists to question, experiment, and redefine the boundaries of creative expression. One of the most significant ways Dada influenced the evolution of art was through its challenge to the very idea of what constituted a work of art. By embracing ready-mades and found objects, Dadaists such as Marcel Duchamp fundamentally shifted the focus of art away from craftsmanship and beauty toward the concept and context of the work itself. This revolutionary idea was absorbed and expanded upon by movements like conceptual art, which emphasized the idea behind the work over its physical execution. The notion that anything could be art, provided it was framed in an artistic context, continues to influence contemporary art practices today. Dada also helped lay the groundwork for Surrealism, which, while evolving from Dada's anti-art stance, brought a more psychological and philosophical dimension to the exploration of the unconscious. Surrealist artists like Salvador Dali and René Magritte embraced Dada's rejection of reason, but they sought to probe deeper, creating works that fused dreams, the subconscious, and reality. Surrealism became one of the most influential movements of the 20th century, shaping both visual art and literature, and its impact can be seen in the work of later artists, including those in the abstract expressionist movement. In addition to surrealism, Dada's emphasis on spontaneity and experimentation laid the groundwork for movements like abstract expressionism and fluxus. Artists like Jackson Pollock, who explored chance and process through his drip paintings, were inspired by Dada's embrace of randomness and freedom from formal constraints. Likewise, fluxus artists in the 1960s, such as Yoko Ono and Nam June Paik, created art that was playful, performative, and anti-commercial, echoing Dada's anti-art sentiments. Furthermore, Dada's influence is seen in the continued blending of art and life. Dada's performances, happenings, and collaborations between artists and non-artists paved the way for the later integration of art with everyday experiences, which has become a hallmark of contemporary art practice. Performance art, installation art, and interactive art continue to challenge the division between the artist, the artwork, and the audience. In essence, Dada's lasting influence is felt in nearly every aspect of modern and contemporary art. Its irreverence, its embrace of chance and chaos, and its focus on concept over form reshape the way artists and audiences alike approach art making and interpretation. Dada's legacy is a testament to the power of art to challenge, subvert, and transform the world around us. Chapter 10, Revisiting Dada Today. In contemporary society, Dada's radical principles and avant-garde approach to art remain a powerful source of inspiration and reflection. Although the movement itself officially ended in the 1920s, its impact on the way we think about art, culture, and society continues to reverberate. Dada's embrace of absurdity, anti-establishment sentiment, and the rejection of traditional art forms paved the way for countless artistic movements that followed, and its legacy endures in many facets of contemporary culture. One of the most notable ways Dada is revisited today is through its influence on performance and conceptual art. The spontaneity and unpredictability of Dada performances laid the groundwork for performance art, a genre that continues to thrive in contemporary art. Artists like Marina Abramović and Laurie Anderson have embraced the Dadaist spirit by challenging the boundaries between art and life, engaging audiences directly in ways that echo Dada's disruptive performances at the Cabaret Voltaire. Dada's influence is also visible in contemporary visual art, particularly in works that question established notions of what art should be. The notion that anything can be art if presented in an artistic context remains central to many contemporary practices, from installation art to social practice art. Furthermore, the internet age has provided new platforms for Dadaist principles to thrive, especially in the realm of digital and media art. The chaotic and fragmented nature of the online world, with its memes, viral videos, and user-generated content, reflects many of Dada's core ideas. The internet has become a space for non-hierarchical, subversive creative expression, where artists and activists can create and share works that challenge conventional norms, much like the Dadaists did in their time. Online communities, especially those engaged in avant-garde and countercultural movements, often share a similar irreverence for authority and tradition. Dada's legacy also endures in the world of activism and political art. The movement's commitment to questioning the status quo and exposing societal absurdities resonates with many contemporary activists who use art as a form of protest. Whether addressing political corruption, environmental destruction, or social inequality, today's political artists often draw upon Dada's anti-authoritarian ethos to confront power structures and critique systems of oppression. In the realm of literature, Dada's influence can be seen in the work of contemporary poets and writers who experiment with language and structure to subvert traditional narrative forms. The embrace of nonsense, wordplay, and the breaking down of linguistic norms has inspired many writers who seek to create new ways of engaging with language and meaning. In revisiting Dada today, we find a movement that continues to challenge, provoke, and inspire. Its radical spirit has not only shaped the course of modern and contemporary art, but also remains a vital force in the ongoing dialogue between art, culture, and society. Dada's rejection of boundaries, its irreverence for tradition, and its embrace of chaos and humor have ensured that its legacy remains a vibrant part of our creative and intellectual landscape. Dada in the digital age, online art and anti-art movements. In the digital age, Dada's core principles of absurdity, anti-art sentiment, and subversion of traditional norms have found new expression in online art and anti-art movements. While Dada initially emerged in response to the horrors of World War I and the limitations of traditional artistic forms, its spirit of rebellion against established norms is more relevant than ever in the age of the Internet. The fluid, decentralized, and chaotic nature of the online world mirrors the very essence of Dada, offering new platforms for artists and activists to engage with audiences, challenge societal conventions, and push the boundaries of what art can be. One of the most significant ways Dada is revisited in the digital age is through the proliferation of meme culture. Memes, like Dada artworks, often thrive on absurdity, irony, and humor, offering a subversive commentary on contemporary life. Just as Dadaists used nonsensical language and imagery to confront societal norms, internet memes use satire, distortion, and absurd humor to critique everything from politics to consumerism, often without a clear or logical message. The viral nature of memes enables them to spread quickly, providing a platform for collective, often anarchistic expressions of dissent, very much in the tradition of Dada's performative and spontaneous actions. Digital artists today, particularly those working in the realms of glitch art, generative art, and virtual reality, have also embraced the principles of chance and randomness championed by the Dadaists. Glitch art, which intentionally incorporates errors and malfunctions in digital images or videos, echoes Dada's celebration of the chaotic and the imperfect. This movement challenges the notion of digital purity, offering a critique of our increasingly polished, controlled online environments. Additionally, generative art, which uses algorithms and code to produce unpredictable, often random results, directly engages with Dada's exploration of chance in the creative process. The rise of social media platforms has also created new avenues for anti-art movements. The decentralized nature of platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok allows individuals to bypass traditional art institutions, creating spaces where unfiltered, unpolished, and often controversial content can be shared. In many ways, this democratization of content production is a digital reincarnation of Dada's challenge to the elitism of the art world. Artists and activists use social media to share politically charged works, confront authority, and resist cultural norms, echoing the spirit of Dada's radical resistance to the establishment. Moreover, the internet has facilitated the emergence of virtual art exhibitions and online galleries, many of which question the very idea of the art object in the traditional sense. Just as Dadaists broke away from the concept of the masterpiece, digital artists today continue to challenge the commodification of art by creating works that exist purely in virtual spaces, free from the constraints of physical galleries or collectors. In this way, Dada's anti-art philosophy lives on in the digital age. The internet's capacity for speed, disruption, and widespread engagement provides fertile ground for artistic practices that resist traditional conventions, engage with absurdity, and challenge power structures, much like the Dadaists did nearly a century ago. Through memes, digital art, and online activism, the rebellious spirit of Dada continues to thrive in a new, ever-evolving form, ensuring its relevance in the 21st century. Dada's revival in contemporary art exhibitions. Dada's revival in contemporary art exhibitions serves as a reminder of the movement's enduring relevance and its ongoing influence on artists and curators today. Although the Dada movement itself ended in the 1920s, its legacy continues to inspire artistic practices that challenge conventional notions of art, aesthetics, and social structures. Modern exhibitions often revisit Dada's radical approach, reflecting its core values of absurdity, subversion, and anti-art in new and exciting contexts. In the past few decades, many contemporary art museums and galleries have dedicated exhibitions to Dada, showcasing how its principles have continued to resonate through the decades. These exhibitions often explore the movement's lasting influence on artists working in diverse media, from sculpture and painting to performance and video art. By revisiting Dada in the present day, curators can draw connections between its historical origins and the ways it has shaped contemporary artistic practices, particularly in conceptual, performance, and installation art. One of the key aspects of Dada's revival in exhibitions is the emphasis on collaboration and collective creation. Much like the original Dadaists, contemporary artists often work together across disciplines, merging art forms, cultures, and ideas to create works that resist traditional categorization. This collaborative spirit is a direct reflection of Dada's anti-hierarchical stance, which rejected the idea of the solitary, individual artist in favor of more inclusive and egalitarian modes of artistic production. Many contemporary art institutions showcase these collaborations through large-scale installations, interactive exhibits, and participatory art, allowing audiences to become active participants in the creative process. Dada's anti-commercial stance also makes it an ideal reference point for contemporary artists who resist the commodification of art. Contemporary exhibitions often highlight works that challenge the commercialization of the art world, questioning the value of art in a market-driven society. This rejection of art as a commodity is directly connected to Dada's anti-establishment ethos, which sought to break free from the traditional art market and institutional frameworks. In many contemporary exhibitions, artists engage in practices that question the very idea of the art object, focusing instead on ephemeral experiences, conceptual works, or collaborative processes. The influence of Dada can also be seen in the incorporation of humor, absurdity, and irony in contemporary art exhibitions. Many artists today use humor and playful subversion to critique political, social, and cultural norms, reflecting the Dadaists' irreverence and refusal to take the status quo seriously. Works that use satire, parody, and absurdity to challenge power structures or explore the absurdity of modern life continue to be central themes in contemporary exhibitions, reinforcing Dada's lasting impact on the way art engages with society. In essence, Dada's revival in contemporary art exhibitions demonstrates how its radical approach to art making, its challenge to traditional notions of beauty and meaning, and its embrace of the absurd continue to resonate with artists today. These exhibitions not only celebrate Dada's historical importance, but also show how its ideas remain relevant and vital in the ever-evolving world of contemporary art. By revisiting Dada, curators and artists alike continue to push the boundaries of what art can be, ensuring that the spirit of the movement lives on in today's cultural landscape. The continued relevance of Dada's radical challenge to tradition. Dada's radical challenge to tradition continues to resonate in contemporary art and culture, highlighting its enduring relevance more than a century after its inception. At its core, Dada was an anti-establishment movement that rejected conventional artistic forms, questioning both the established norms of art and the societal structures that upheld them. The movement's embrace of absurdity, chance, and spontaneity as essential components of creative expression disrupted the very notion of what art could be. This rejection of tradition and structure has influenced countless artistic practices, continuing to inspire modern artists who seek to break free from conventional boundaries. One of the central aspects of Dada's challenge to tradition was its rejection of the notion that art must adhere to predefined standards of beauty, craftsmanship, and meaning. By celebrating randomness, chaos, and even nonsense, Dadaists fundamentally questioned what could be considered art. Today, artists continue to reject these traditional standards in favor of more inclusive, fluid definitions of artistic expression. Contemporary artists working in conceptual, performance, and digital media are increasingly concerned with the idea that art should not be confined to a singular, object-based experience, but should instead encompass a range of forms and ideas. These artists often challenge established hierarchies within the art world, questioning the authority of galleries, museums, and institutions that dictate the value of art. Dada's legacy is also evident in the rise of anti-art movements that continue to challenge cultural, political, and social norms. Much like the Dadaists' critique of authority and societal conventions, contemporary movements like activism through art, political art, and street art use creative practices to question and subvert power structures. Whether addressing issues like consumerism, inequality, or political corruption, today's artists draw inspiration from Dada's irreverence toward the establishment. The spirit of Dada can be seen in artworks that resist traditional definitions of beauty, subvert traditional media, and embrace unconventional forms of expression as a means of protest. Dada's challenge to traditional art extends into contemporary culture as well, where the same spirit of defiance is evident in popular culture. The internet, with its vast and decentralized platforms, has become a space where absurdity, satire, and rebellion flourish. Memes, digital art, and viral content often draw on Dada's tactics of disruption and deconstruction to engage with contemporary issues, using humor, chaos, and irony to comment on social and political realities. The culture of remixing, reinterpreting, and recontextualizing content in the digital age reflects Dada's foundational ideas about the fluidity of art and the rejection of fixed meanings. In essence, Dada's radical challenge to tradition has not only persisted but evolved, influencing generations of artists and thinkers who continue to question the boundaries of art, culture, and society. By rejecting the conventions of their time, the Dadaists paved the way for a more inclusive, diverse, and ever-changing landscape of artistic expression. Their spirit of defiance and irreverence continues to inspire and provoke, ensuring that Dada's challenge to tradition remains an integral part of contemporary artistic and cultural practice. The future of Dada and anti-art. The future of Dada and anti-art is bound to continue evolving as it adapts to the changing landscape of culture, technology, and society. While Dada as a formal movement ended in the 1920s, its radical questioning of art, culture, and authority has had a lasting influence on contemporary artistic practices. The core principles of Dada, rebellion, absurdity, anti-establishment attitudes, and the rejection of traditional artistic norms, still resonate today, particularly in response to the complexities and challenges of the modern world. As global issues such as political unrest, climate change, and social inequality intensify, Dada's anti-art philosophy remains relevant as a tool for creative protest, subversion, and commentary. The expansion of digital technology has provided new avenues for the expression of Dada's principles. In a world dominated by digital media and virtual environments, artists now have unprecedented access to tools that enable them to create and distribute anti-art on a global scale. Social media platforms, digital video, and online interactive art allow for immediate, decentralized engagement with audiences, often challenging established norms of what is considered art. In many ways, the internet mirrors the anarchistic, decentralized ethos of Dada, enabling artists to bypass traditional institutions and create new forms of creative expression that reflect the chaos and randomness championed by Dadaists. The use of artificial intelligence, generative art, and virtual reality in contemporary art has also opened up new possibilities for Dada's principles to thrive. AI-driven art often embraces randomness and unpredictability, creating works that resist the idea of the artist's control or intent, much like the chance elements that Dada artists incorporated into their work. Virtual reality environments, on the other hand, can create immersive spaces where the viewer's experience is manipulated and distorted, further subverting traditional expectations of art as a passive viewing experience. These emerging technologies allow for the exploration of Dada's ideas in novel ways, continuing the movement's legacy of experimentation and breaking down the boundaries between artist, viewer, and artwork. In addition, Dada's ongoing influence on contemporary social movements demonstrates its enduring relevance. Artists today continue to employ subversive, anti-establishment tactics to address pressing issues such as racial injustice, gender inequality, and political corruption. Just as the Dadaists reacted to the horrors of World War I, today's artists often respond to global crises through disruptive art that challenges authority, questions mainstream narratives, and advocates for change. Dada's philosophy of resistance, protest, and questioning of societal norms will likely remain central to the work of artists who seek to address the complexities of modern life. In conclusion, the future of Dada and anti-art is intrinsically tied to the evolving political, social, and technological landscape. As society continues to confront new challenges, Dada's spirit of rebellion and critique will continue to inspire artists who seek to question, disrupt, and subvert the status quo. Whether through digital art, AI, or activism, the principles of Dada will likely remain a powerful tool for challenging tradition and expanding the possibilities of what art can be. You have been listening to Dada Art and Anti-Art, the radical movement that challenged conventions, written by High Event, narrated by Kara Miller.